At our third anniversary dinner, my husband casually slipped off his wedding band, placed it next to his crystal wine glass, and told me he was not sure about our marriage anymore. He said he needed space to find himself. I looked at the man I had built a life with, took a sip of my sparkling water, and simply replied, "I understand." What he did not know was that my designer purse resting right between our feet held 60 high-resolution photos of him kissing my business partner on a beach in Cabo. When he packed his bags that night for a solo camping trip, I helped him carry his luggage to the door. I had no idea that by the next morning, the real nightmare would begin, and the business I built from the ground up would be gutted. I am Paige, exactly 28 years old, and until recently the proud founder and director of one of the top experiential marketing agencies in Austin, Texas. If you have ever smiled through the ultimate betrayal while quietly plotting your survival, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that a woman's silence is not weakness, but a loaded weapon. The restaurant was Eberly, one of the most exclusive dining spots in Austin. I had booked the reservation 3 months in advance to celebrate our anniversary. The ambient lighting caught the edge of Liam's tailored suit, a suit I had bought him when he finally landed a senior advisory role at his corporate financial firm. He was 30 years old, handsome, and completely entirely full of himself. Throughout the appetizers, he had been distracted checking his phone under the heavy linen tablecloth. I had ignored it, playing the part of the devoted, successful wife. We were the ultimate Austin power couple. I ran my own highly lucrative marketing agency, and he managed corporate wealth. We had the luxury condo, the expensive cars, and the perfectly curated social media presence. Then the main course arrived. Liam pushed his seared steak around his plate, refusing to meet my eyes. He set his fork down, reached over to his left hand, and slid the gold band off his finger. The metal made a sharp clinking sound against the polished mahogany table. He stared at the ring for a long moment before finally looking up at me. His expression was a practiced mask of sorrow, a look I am sure he had rehearsed in the mirror countless times that morning. "I am not sure about us anymore, Paige," he said, his voice dropping to that serious tone he used when delivering bad news to his financial clients. "I feel suffocated by this life, by your constant ambition. I need space to find myself again, to figure out what I really want out of my future." The silence that followed was heavy, pressing down on the space between us. A normal wife might have cried, begged, or thrown a glass of expensive red wine in his face. A year ago, I might have been that exact wife. But sitting there looking at the man I had promised my entire life to, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, calculating clarity. I reached for my water glass, took a slow, measured sip, and set it back down precisely on the coaster. "I understand," I said softly, my voice betraying no emotion whatsoever. Liam blinked clearly, thrown off balance by my lack of hysterics. He had anticipated a massive fight, a tearful breakdown, something he could use to justify his actions and paint me as the unstable workaholic wife. My calm agreement short-circuited his entire script. "You do?" he asked, leaning forward slightly, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Yes," I replied, giving him a tight, sympathetic smile. "If you need space, you should absolutely take it." Inside my chest, an entirely different reality was burning. Resting against my ankle beneath the table was my leather tote bag. Inside that bag, tucked neatly into a thick manila envelope, was the absolute truth. 2 weeks ago, I had noticed glaring discrepancies in our joint credit card statements. There were hotel charges in Mexico that Liam claimed were for an exclusive financial summit. I had hired a private investigator who followed him straight to a luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas. The photos the investigator handed me yesterday morning were burned permanently into my retinas. Liam lounging on a private cabana, Liam sharing a romantic sunset dinner, Liam passionately kissing Blair. Blair, my 29-year-old business partner, the woman who owned 40% of the marketing agency I had founded. The woman who sat across from me in budget meetings and called me her absolute best friend. My husband and my business partner were sharing a bed and using my hard-earned money to fund it. Liam cleared his throat quickly, recovering his composure. He launched into a speech about how he just needed a few days off the grid to clear his head. He claimed he was going on a solo camping trip to Big Bend National Park. He said he needed raw nature and absolute isolation to process his complex feelings about our marriage. I nodded along to every single lie, memorizing the cadence of his deception. We left the restaurant early. The drive back to our downtown condo was suffocatingly quiet. As soon as we stepped through the front door, Liam went straight to our master bedroom and began pulling clothes from his side of the massive walk-in closet. He packed with frantic energy, shoving expensive outdoor gear into his canvas duffel bag alongside items that clearly belonged at a luxury beach resort, not a rugged campsite. I stood in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, watching him play out his grand, dramatic exit. He paused, grabbing his leather toiletry bag, and looked at me with that same manufactured guilt he had worn at the restaurant. "I am really sorry to do this on our anniversary page," he said, zipping the bag shut with a sharp tug. "I just cannot pretend anymore. I need to be completely isolated for a week. No cell service, no emails, just me and my thoughts." "Take all the time you need, Liam," I said, stepping aside to let him pass into the hallway. "Find whatever it is you are looking for out there." He dragged his bag down the hallway and out the front door. The heavy lock clicked shut behind him, echoing loudly through the empty condo. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the street below. I watched his sleek silver car pull out of the underground parking garage and merge into the glowing stream of evening Austin traffic. He was not driving west toward the state park. He was heading straight for the international airport to meet Blair. I did not shed a single tear as I watched his taillights disappear. I walked to the kitchen island, pulled the thick manila envelope from my purse, and spread the glossy photographs across the cold marble counter. The betrayal was absolute, encompassing my home and my livelihood. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought I was the clueless, ambitious wife who would just roll over and accept a sudden, heartbreaking separation. They were terribly wrong. As I stared at the image of Blair laughing in my husband's arms, I realized the rules of engagement had forever changed. If they wanted to play a ruthless game of deception, they were about to learn that I wrote the entire rulebook. The morning sun hit the Austin skyline with a blinding glare, but I felt completely numb to the heat. I stood in front of my vanity mirror, locking away the betrayal behind a mask of absolute perfection. I chose a structured emerald green blazer and a pair of razor-sharp stilettos. Armor. Today required armor. I gathered the glossy photographs of my husband and my business partner, slid them back into the manila envelope, and locked them inside my personal wall safe. Then I grabbed my keys and drove to the office exactly as I did every other Tuesday. Our experiential marketing agency occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse downtown. I had signed the lease 3 years ago when the business was just a wild idea and a handful of ambitious contacts. Now, it was a multi-million-dollar enterprise, humming with 30 employees, coordinating vendor logistics, designing immersive brand activations, and managing elite guest lists. The moment the elevator doors parted, the chaotic energy of the agency washed over me. Phones were ringing, assistants were rushing past with fabric swatches, and my lead event coordinator was arguing with a lighting vendor. Normally, this environment gave me a rush of adrenaline. Today, it felt like walking into a crime scene where the perpetrators were still smiling at me. I walked straight to my glass-walled office at the end of the hall. I set my bag down, booted up my computer, and took a slow, deliberate breath. My hands were perfectly steady. "Good morning, Paige," a sickeningly sweet voice called out. I looked up. Blair leaned against my doorframe, holding 2 cups of artisanal coffee. She wore a tailored ivory dress that contrasted sharply with her dark hair. At 29, she exuded the kind of effortless, trendy confidence that drew clients in. To everyone else, she was my brilliant creative counterpart, the co-founder who shared my vision. To me, she was the woman who had spent the last 6 months sleeping with my husband. "I brought you a vanilla oat latte," Blair said, stepping into my office and placing the cup on my desk. "You usually get them when you have a rough night." She took a seat in the chair opposite my desk, crossing her legs elegantly. Her eyes swept over my face, searching for cracks in my composure. I picked up the coffee, wrapping my fingers around the warm cardboard sleeve. The sheer audacity of her presence, of her feigned intuition about my habits, made my stomach twist in disgust. "Thank you, Blair," I said, keeping my tone light and professional. "That was very thoughtful of you." Blair leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. She lowered her voice, adopting a tone of deep, intimate concern. "Are you okay? You look incredibly tense this morning. Did something happen with Liam last night?" The question was a direct hit, a calculated probe to see how much damage she and Liam had inflicted. I stared at her perfectly painted lips, remembering the photograph of those same lips pressed against my husband's neck in a private cabana. She was fishing for a breakdown. She wanted me to cry, to fall apart in front of her, so she could play the supportive best friend while secretly reveling in my destruction. "Liam and I had a long conversation," I replied, holding her gaze without blinking. "He decided he needs some space. He packed a bag and left for a solo camping trip." Blair placed a hand over her heart, her eyes widening in a masterful display of shock and sympathy. "Oh my God, Paige, I am so incredibly sorry. That is awful. Are you holding up okay? I cannot believe he would just leave like that." "He has been feeling overwhelmed," I said, sipping the coffee she bought me. "He said he needs absolute isolation to figure out what he wants. No cell service, just him and nature." Blair's performance was award-winning. She reached across the desk and placed her hand over mine, giving it a gentle, comforting squeeze. Her skin was warm and soft. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to recoil violently. "You know, Liam has always struggled with his priorities," she murmured, her thumb stroking the back of my hand. "But you are so strong, Paige. You do not deserve to be treated this way. If you need anything at all, a shoulder to cry on, someone to take over your meetings, just tell me. We are partners in everything." I pulled my hand back smoothly, reaching for a stack of event proposals to break the physical contact. "I appreciate that, Blair. I really do. But right now, the best thing for me is to focus entirely on work. We have the massive tech gala coming up in 4 weeks, and we cannot afford any distractions. The client is expecting a flawless execution." Blair sat back up, her eyes flashing with a brief, unmistakable gleam of triumph. I had handed her exactly what she wanted, a vulnerable, distracted partner. "Of course," she agreed, nodding solemnly. "In fact, why do not you let me take the lead on the final vendor negotiations today? You should go home early and rest. I can handle the tech client. I can handle everything here." Her eagerness to isolate me from our biggest client was glaringly obvious now. The tech gala was our crown jewel, an event with a $500,000 budget that would solidify our agency as the premier choice for tech giants across Texas. Blair wanted control over the money, the client relationship, and the prestige. She was systematically attempting to push me out of my own empire while pretending to protect my mental health. "That is a kind offer," I said, matching her solemn nod. "Let us review the vendor contracts together this afternoon just to make sure we are fully aligned. Then I might take you up on that offer to leave early." Blair smiled, her teeth gleaming white against her ivory dress. "Sounds like a perfect plan. I will get the files ready. You just breathe, Paige. I have got your back." She stood up and walked out of my office, her heels clicking rhythmically down the hallway. I watched her greet our staff with bubbly enthusiasm, masking her toxic reality beneath a cheerful professional veneer. I turned back to my monitor, bringing up the master spreadsheet for the tech gala budget. My mind was operating at 1,000 miles an hour, analyzing every move she made, every word she spoke. She and Liam had severely miscalculated. They assumed my dedication to my marriage and my business made me predictable. They assumed my heartbreak would paralyze me. But watching Blair parade around my agency wearing a mask of friendship while plotting my ruin did not break me. It forged me into something infinitely more dangerous. I sat in my quiet glass office, calmly reviewing the financial projections, waiting for the precise moment to begin dismantling their entire world. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating, and electric all at once. I took another sip of the coffee she bought me, letting the bitter taste sharpen my resolve. They wanted a war, and I was going to give them a massacre. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating, and electric all at once. I took another sip of the coffee she bought me, letting the bitter taste sharpen my resolve. They wanted a war, and I was going to give them a massacre. By 10 o'clock, the agency was in full swing. My glass office provided the perfect vantage point to watch the floor. I was halfway through a vendor logistics spreadsheet when Marcus, our senior accountant, knocked rapidly on my door. He did not wait for me to answer before stepping inside and shutting the heavy glass door behind him. Marcus was a meticulous man who color-coded his highlighters. Right now he was pale and clutching a leather binder tight against his chest. "Paige, we have a massive problem," he said, keeping his voice to a strained whisper. I was doing the mid-month reconciliation, and I just checked the corporate emergency reserve. It is gone. I stopped typing. The emergency fund was our safety net, heavily padded with over $120,000 intended strictly for catastrophic business interruptions. It required dual authorization for any withdrawal over 10 grand. "What do you mean, gone?" I asked, keeping my tone incredibly steady. "I mean, the balance is currently $400, Marcus replied, opening his binder and sliding a printed bank statement across my desk. A wire transfer for $120,000 was initiated late last night. It completely bypassed the standard approval queue. I tried calling the bank, but they said the authorization codes used were valid. They used your secondary executive override page." I stared at the black ink on the page. My secondary override was a code I kept in a locked drawer at home, a drawer Liam had the key to. My husband had literally handed my business partner the keys to my company vault while packing his bags for his fake camping trip. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, sliding the paper into my top drawer. "Do not panic. I authorized a late-night vendor payment for the tech gala. I simply forgot to send you the receipt. I will email the documentation to you by noon." Marcus exhaled a massive breath of relief, his shoulders instantly dropping. "Thank God," he laughed nervously. "I thought we had been hacked. I will look out for that receipt." As soon as Marcus left, I picked up my desk phone and dialed Blair's extension. She answered on the first ring, her voice dripping with artificial sunshine. "Hey, partner. What do you need?" she chirped. "Could you step into my office for a second?" I asked. "We need to discuss the tech gala budget." Blair strutted into my office less than a minute later, carrying a sleek tablet. She dropped into the chair across from me, looking entirely unbothered. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. "Marcus just brought me the mid-month reconciliation," I said, watching her eyes closely. "It seems $120,000 was wired out of the emergency reserve last night using my override code." Blair did not even flinch. She let out a dramatic sigh and rolled her eyes. I knew Marcus was going to freak out about that. "I was going to tell you this morning, but we got so sidetracked talking about Liam. I am so sorry, Paige. You transferred the money I asked, keeping my voice perfectly neutral." "I had to," Blair said, leaning forward passionately. "The venue coordinator for the tech gala called me on my cell at 9 last night. Another massive corporate client was trying to buy out our dates. They offered a premium to bump us. The only way to secure the space was to wire an immediate, non-refundable deposit. I tried to call you, but you were at your anniversary dinner, and I knew you would want me to handle it. I used the emergency code you keep at the house because Liam answered the phone and gave it to me. I literally saved the event page. It was a flawless lie. It was logical, urgent, and played perfectly on my supposed distraction with my marriage. A week ago, I would have thanked her for her quick thinking and dedication. Now I just looked at her flawless makeup and marveled at the sheer predatory nature of her deception. "That was a close call," I said, forcing a grateful smile. "You did the right thing, Blair. The tech gala is too important to lose. Just forward me the invoice and the wire receipt so I can get Marcus to balance the books." "Absolutely." Blair beamed, standing up. "I will send it right over. You just focus on taking care of yourself today." She walked out victorious. She thought I was completely blind. She thought my trust in her was absolute. 5 minutes later, an email hit my inbox with an attached PDF. It was an invoice from a company named Apex Event Solutions, billing exactly $120,000 for venue retention fees. The document looked highly professional, complete with a sleek logo and standard terms of service. I locked my office door and pulled down the privacy blinds. I did not open our standard accounting software. Instead, I logged directly into the master banking portal, a back-end system only I had administrative access to. I pulled up the raw data for the wire transfer. I bypassed the fake invoice and traced the actual routing and account numbers where the money had landed. The receiving bank was not a commercial account associated with the downtown convention center. It was a small regional bank branch located in the Austin suburbs. I opened a new tab and navigated to the Texas Secretary of State Business Registry. I typed in Apex Event Solutions. My heart beat in a slow, heavy rhythm as the search results populated on my screen. The LLC had not been registered years ago like a legitimate vendor. It had been registered exactly 3 days ago. I scrolled down to the incorporation documents, viewing the raw public filings. The registered agent was listed as a third-party legal service designed to keep the owners anonymous. But careless criminals always leave a trace. I pulled the property tax records for the mailing address associated with the LLC registration. The address was a small residential property on the east side of town. A property I recognized instantly. It was a rental home owned by Liam's mother. My husband and my business partner had not just slept together. They had orchestrated a premeditated corporate theft. They had drained my emergency fund to capitalize their own shadow company, using the tech gala as a convenient smokescreen. They were using my own money to build a rival agency right under my nose. I stared at the screen, the glowing blue light reflecting in my eyes. They thought they had crippled me with this first financial strike. They did not realize they had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy them. I closed the laptop and locked my office door. The adrenaline was burning through my veins, and I needed to step out of the building before I was forced to look at Blair again. I walked 3 blocks down Congress Avenue to a high-end bistro to grab a quick lunch and clear my head. The Texas heat was already blistering, but I barely felt it. My mind was entirely consumed by the fake invoice and the phantom LLC. I approached the counter, ordered a simple salad, and handed the cashier my sleek metal debit card. It was tied directly to the primary personal joint checking account Liam and I shared. The card reader processed for a moment before emitting a harsh, grating beep. The cashier, a young girl with a bored expression, frowned and swiped it again. "It says declined," she mumbled, tapping the screen. I felt a tiny prickle of annoyance, but nothing more. "Try this one," I said, retrieving a backup credit card from the same bank. "We kept a high limit on it for emergencies and travel." She inserted the chip. Another harsh beep. "Declined again," she said, pushing the card back across the counter. I paid with a $50 bill from my wallet and walked out carrying a salad I knew I would not eat. I threw it into the nearest trash can at the corner of the street. My appetite was entirely gone, replaced by a sudden chilling realization. The agency emergency fund was not the only target. I walked briskly to my car and drove straight to the main branch of our bank, located in the heart of the financial district. The air conditioning inside the grand marble lobby was freezing, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat outside. I bypassed the standard teller line and walked directly toward the glass-enclosed office of our personal wealth manager, Mr. Sterling. He had handled our private accounts for 5 years and knew us both by name. When he saw me standing in his doorway, his face instantly drained of color. He stood up abruptly, knocking a pen off his desk. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. "Paige," he said, his voice tight and unnatural. "I was just about to call you. Please come in." I took a seat in the heavy leather chair across from his polished oak desk. I crossed my legs and placed my purse on the floor, maintaining a posture of absolute authority. "My cards were just declined at a restaurant, Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my tone perfectly even. "I need to know why our personal joint accounts are currently locked." He swallowed hard, sinking back into his chair. He pulled up our file on his monitor, his eyes darting frantically across the screen before meeting mine. He looked profoundly uncomfortable. "The accounts triggered an automatic security freeze this morning," he explained quietly. "The system locked everything down due to insufficient funds to cover the incoming loan origination fees and the massive outgoing wire transfer." I stared at him, letting the words settle in the quiet office. The ambient noise of the bank lobby faded away. "What loan origination fees?" I asked, my voice dropping to a calm, dangerous whisper. We do not have any new loans. We paid off our vehicles last year, and the condo mortgage is completely up to date. Mr. Sterling frowned deeply, turning his monitor so I could see the screen. The numbers displayed in red were staggering. Liam came in yesterday afternoon, Paige. He sat right in that chair. He finalized the paperwork for a massive second mortgage on your downtown condo. He cashed out nearly $400,000 in equity. The money was deposited into your joint account and then immediately wired out to an external business account early this morning. That massive transfer, combined with the bank fees, drained your personal checking to zero, triggering the automatic freeze. The room felt like a vacuum. The air was entirely sucked out of the space. My husband had not just emptied the business reserve. He had leveraged the roof over my head. He had taken the equity from a luxury condo that I had paid the initial down payment for, using the profits from my very first marketing contracts. He listed the purpose of the loan as startup capital. Mr. Sterling continued, his voice wavering slightly. He said you two were launching a new, highly confidential side venture and needed the liquid cash immediately to secure vendor contracts. A second mortgage requires both signatures, I stated, staring directly into Mr. Sterling's eyes. Texas is a community property state. I was not here yesterday. I never signed a single piece of paper authorizing a loan against my home. Mr. Sterling reached into his locked filing drawer and pulled out a thick stack of printed documents. He slid them cautiously across the polished desk toward me. Liam anticipated that, he explained. He presented a comprehensive power of attorney. It was drawn up by a local law firm and fully notarized. It granted him absolute authority to execute real estate and financial transactions on your behalf. He said you were entirely consumed with a major upcoming marketing campaign and could not leave the agency to sign the paperwork in person. I picked up the top page of the document. I stared at the ink. There was my signature, perfectly replicated right down to the slight aggressive slant of the letter P and the sharp loop of the G. It was a flawless, immaculate forgery. Liam had clearly spent hours practicing my handwriting, studying the way I signed every agency contract so he could execute this specific theft. He had orchestrated this entire scenario with terrifying precision. The fake power of attorney, the fake notary, the lie about my busy schedule. He was using the $400,000 from our home equity to fund the rival marketing agency with Blair. He was bankrupting me personally and professionally while smiling in my face and telling me he just needed a week of isolation to think about our marriage. Mr. Sterling was watching me closely, waiting for a reaction. He expected me to scream, to demand he call the police, to completely fall apart right there in his office. But exposing the forgery right now would immediately freeze the funds and alert Liam that I knew exactly what he was doing. It would force their hand before I had gathered all my weapons. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to believe they had successfully pulled off the heist of the century. I placed the document back on the desk and smoothed out the edges. I offered Mr. Sterling a tight, polite smile. Of course, I said, my voice steady and completely void of panic. I apologize, Mr. Sterling. Liam and I have been moving so fast on this new venture that I completely forgot he was executing the power of attorney yesterday afternoon. The freeze on the cards just caught me off guard. Please lift the security hold on the accounts as soon as possible. Mr. Sterling let out a massive breath of relief, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. Oh, thank God, he chuckled nervously. I will have the hold removed immediately, Paige. I asked for a full copy of the loan documents for my personal records. I tucked the papers into my purse, thanked him for his time, and walked out of the bank. I stepped back into the blinding Texas sunlight. My personal accounts were empty. My business emergency fund was gone. My home was leveraged to the breaking point. Liam and Blair had dug a massive financial grave and pushed me right to the edge of it. I smiled, walking to my car. They had given me all the rope they had, and now I was going to use it to hang them. I smiled, walking to my car. They had given me all the rope they had, and now I was going to use it to hang them. I slid into the blistering heat of my leather seat and checked the dashboard clock. It was 12:15. The timing of this day was almost poetically cruel. I had exactly 15 minutes to make it to the Westlake Country Club for a pre-scheduled mandatory monthly lunch with Liam's family. A lunch I routinely dreaded, but today it felt like walking into a cage of starved lions while carrying a concealed weapon. I turned the ignition, blasted the air conditioning to dry the faint layer of nervous sweat on my palms, and drove toward the affluent hills of Westlake. The country club dining room was a sea of pastel linen, clinking crystal, and aggressively cheerful wealth. I spotted them immediately at a prime table by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the pristine 18th hole. Brenda, my mother-in-law, sat at the head of the table, radiating judgmental authority in a stiff Chanel blouse. Sydney, her carbon copy daughter, sat to her right, lazily stirring a mimosa. And there at the far end of the table was Jamal. At 32, Jamal was Sydney's husband and a brilliant forensic auditor. He was a tall, striking Black American man who always looked slightly out of place in the suffocatingly traditional white conservative confines of the Wilson family gatherings. He possessed a sharp, analytical mind that clashed constantly with their superficial drama. Today, he looked particularly exhausted, rubbing his temples as Sydney whispered fiercely into her phone. I approached the table, pulling out the empty chair directly across from Sydney. Brenda did not offer a greeting. She simply set down her water goblet and fixed me with a stare cold enough to freeze summer rain. "Well," Paige, Brenda said, her voice cutting through the ambient chatter of the dining room, "I suppose we should skip the pleasantries. Liam called me this morning from his satellite phone. He sounded absolutely broken." I signaled a passing waiter for a menu before meeting her gaze. "He told me he was taking a few days in Big Bend," I said, keeping my tone perfectly mild. Sydney scoffed, setting her mimosa down with a sharp, condescending clink. "He ran to the wilderness because he is having a complete mental collapse, Paige. He told us everything. He is deeply, deeply depressed, and honestly, we are not surprised in the slightest." I folded my hands neatly in my lap. "Is that so?" Brenda leaned forward, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of the white tablecloth. "You have completely neglected him, Paige. Your obsession with that marketing agency of yours has consumed your entire marriage. You work 80-hour weeks, you travel constantly, and you leave my son in an empty condo to manage his high-pressure financial career all by himself. A man needs a wife, not a roommate who treats him like a networking contact. You drove him to this breakdown with your relentless, selfish workaholism." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Liam, the man who had just forged my signature, stolen $400,000 and was currently sipping margaritas on a beach in Mexico with my business partner, was playing the ultimate victim to his wealthy mother. He had weaponized his fake depression to secure their sympathy and paint me as the villain before the financial fallout hit. Sydney eagerly jumped in right on cue, echoing her mother's venom. "We all saw this coming from the day you launched that company. You have been so hyper-focused on your own ambition that you completely emasculated him. You make more money than him, and you never let him forget it. He feels worthless, Paige. He feels like he does not even have a real partner to come home to." "That is entirely unfair," Jamal said, his deep voice suddenly silencing Sydney. I turned to look at him. Jamal's jaw was clenched tight, and he was glaring at his wife. He placed his hands flat on the table, leaning into the center of the hostile circle. "Paige built a highly successful business from absolutely nothing." Jamal continued, his tone firm and measured. "She provides an incredible life for both of them. Liam is a grown man and a corporate wealth manager. If he is unhappy with his marriage, he should communicate like an adult, not run off to the woods and call his mother to complain about his wife's career. You cannot blame Paige's success for Liam's personal issues." The silence that followed was absolute. Brenda turned her head slowly, fixing Jamal with a look of pure, unadulterated venom. The subtle class and racial dynamics that she usually kept buried beneath polite Southern hospitality flared dangerously in her eyes. "Excuse me, Jamal," Brenda said, her voice dropping an octave into a terrifyingly polite register. "This is a family matter. We are discussing my son and his marriage. You may crunch numbers for a living, but you do not understand the emotional dynamics of this family. Do not ever speak to my daughter that way again, and do not attempt to defend a woman who has clearly driven my son into a deep psychological crisis." Sydney shot Jamal a severe warning glare, placing a proprietary demanding hand on his forearm. "Just stay out of it, Jamal, you do not get it. He is my brother." Jamal stared at his wife, pulling his arm away from her grasp with a sharp jerk. Disgust radiated from every line of his face. He looked at me, his dark eyes offering a silent, profound apology for the toxic crossfire I was sitting in. He knew the Wilson family playbook better than anyone, the gaslighting, the blame, shifting, the absolute refusal to hold Liam accountable for his own actions. I looked at Brenda and then at Sydney. They were expecting me to crack, to defend myself, to apologize, and promise I would step back from my agency to be a better traditional wife. They wanted me on my knees begging for their forgiveness so they could relay my submission back to Liam. They wanted to break me before he even returned. I picked up my water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip, exactly as I had done at dinner the night before. "You are right, Brenda," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly detached. "I have been very focused on my business lately. Perhaps Liam does need something completely different out of life. I appreciate you sharing his feelings with me." Brenda looked entirely thrown by my lack of defense. She opened her mouth to deliver another barb, but I simply opened my menu, projecting an aura of complete professional indifference. I let them sit in their self-righteous anger, completely unaware that they were aggressively defending a man who had just committed massive financial fraud. I caught Jamal's eye one more time and saw the sharp, analytical gears turning in his head. He was a forensic auditor, and he recognized the look of a woman who was no longer fighting for her marriage, but actively calculating a massive, devastating return on investment. I did not stay for dessert. I placed a crisp $100 bill on the pristine white tablecloth, stood up, and walked out of the dining room without another word. The heavy mahogany doors of the Westlake Country Club swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of clinking silver and forced laughter. I stepped into the blistering afternoon heat. The asphalt of the parking lot radiated a visible wave of distortion, but the fire burning inside my chest was significantly hotter. I navigated the rows of polished luxury vehicles searching for my car. My mind was rapidly sorting through the legal and financial implications of the forged power of attorney. I reached my sedan and unlocked the door. "Paige, hold on a second." I spun around. Jamal emerged from the shadow of a massive black SUV parked 2 spots down. He was glancing over his shoulder toward the clubhouse entrance, making sure we were entirely alone. His usual composed demeanor was replaced by a rigid, urgent tension. "Jamal," I said, keeping my hand on the car door, "you should go back inside before Brenda realizes you slipped away. She might cut you out of the will." He let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "I do not want a single dime of their toxic money, Paige." He closed the distance between us, stopping just a few feet away. "I saw the look in your eyes at the table. You know Liam is lying. You know he is not in the woods having a breakdown." "I know exactly what my husband is doing," I replied, my voice dropping to a flat, clinical pitch. Jamal reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his smartphone. "Good, because it is actually much worse than you think." Sydney left her tablet unlocked on the kitchen counter this morning. I synced a few screenshots to my phone before she realized what I was doing. "You need to see this to understand exactly what you are up against." He tapped the screen and held the device out to me. It was a screenshot of a private group chat titled "The Real Wilsons." The active participants were Brenda, Sydney, and Liam. I stared at the high-resolution image dominating the screen. It was a photograph of Liam and Blair. They were not wearing hiking gear. They were lounging on a pristine white sand beach, holding crystal flutes of champagne. The turquoise water of the Caribbean stretched out behind them. Blair was wearing a designer bikini and a massive, triumphant smile. Liam's arm was wrapped tightly around her waist, pulling her close. I read the text messages timestamped right below the photograph. "Liam sent at 9 last night. The new venue deposit cleared. We are officially in business. Thank you, Mom, for the use of the rental house." Brenda sent 2 minutes later. "You are so welcome, darling. I am so glad you finally found a real partner. Blair is so much more suitable for our family. She actually respects you." Sydney sent 5 minutes later. "The new agency is going to crush Paige. Cannot wait to see her face when she realizes Apex Event Solutions just poached her biggest client. Enjoy Cabo, you two." I stared at the glowing screen. My lungs forgot how to process oxygen. The betrayal was not a secret affair between my husband and my business partner. It was a fully funded family conspiracy. Brenda and Sydney knew everything. They were actively celebrating my destruction. Brenda was knowingly providing the physical address for their fraudulent LLC. They had watched me sit at that lunch table, listen to Brenda berate me for driving Liam to depression, and reveled in the sick, twisted joke of it all. Jamal pulled the phone back and slid it into his pocket. His dark eyes were filled with profound disgust. They are bankrolling him. Page Jamal said, his voice a low, urgent warning. I am a forensic auditor, and I know financial abuse when I see it. Brenda transferred $50,000 into a new holding account for Liam 3 days ago. They know he forged your signature on that second mortgage. They encouraged him to do it. They view your business as a threat to his ego, and they want to strip you of everything you built so he can play the successful entrepreneur with Blair. Why are you showing me this? I asked, looking up at him. Why risk the fallout with Sydney? Because I know what it feels like to be treated like an outsider by these people, Jamal said, his jaw clenching. I watch them belittle you the same way they try to belittle me. They think their wealth makes them untouchable. They think they can destroy a person's life and face zero consequences because they have the right country club membership. It makes me sick. I am filing for divorce next week. I am completely done with Sydney and her twisted family. But you need to act right now, Paige. I took a slow, steadying breath, letting the scorching Texas heat thaw the ice in my veins. The puzzle was completely assembled. Every piece was locked perfectly into place. They are using the money he stole from your home equity to secure the vendors for the tech gala. Jamal continued, speaking rapidly. They plan to launch Apex Event Solutions using your crown jewel client as their premier showcase. They are going to pull the rug out from under you the night of the event. You need to save yourself, Paige. Burn them to the ground before they take everything. I looked at Jamal, feeling a sudden, intense wave of gratitude for this man I had barely spoken to over the last 5 years. He had just handed me the final nail for their collective coffin. Thank you, Jamal, I said, my voice possessing a chilling, absolute calm. You do not need to worry about me saving myself. I am not going to just stop them. I am going to make sure they lose absolutely everything they value. Jamal gave a single sharp nod of respect. He turned and walked briskly back toward the country club, leaving me alone in the sun-baked parking lot. I opened my car door and slid into the driver's seat. I did not turn the key right away. I sat in the stifling heat, letting the reality of the group chat wash over me. My mother-in-law had smiled at me while funding the woman sleeping with my husband. My sister-in-law had cheered for the theft of my company. My husband was toasting to my ruin on a beach in Cabo, using my money to buy the champagne. I pulled my phone from my purse and dialed Marcus, my senior accountant back at the agency. He answered on the second ring. Marcus, I need you to do exactly as I say. I instructed, my tone radiating pure executive command. I need you to freeze every single corporate credit card assigned to Blair immediately. Revoke her access to the accounting portal and call building security to deactivate her key fob. Tell them she is no longer authorized to enter the premises without my explicit physical presence. Done, Marcus said, his voice tight with sudden alarm. Paige, what is going on? I stared through the windshield at the sprawling, opulent country club. We are doing some rapid corporate restructuring, I replied. I will be back at the office in 20 minutes. Pull every vendor contract we have for the tech gala and bring them to my desk. We have a lot of work to do. I hung up the phone and started the engine. The engine roared to life, a low, aggressive rumble that perfectly matched the violent energy surging through my veins. The Wilson family wanted to play dirty financial games. They wanted to steal my life and hand it to a younger, more compliant woman. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They forgot that I built my empire from scratch. I knew how to navigate the trenches. I threw the car into drive and sped out of the parking lot, leaving the country club in my rearview mirror. The time for gathering evidence was over. The execution phase had officially begun. I threw the car into drive and sped out of the parking lot, leaving the country club in my rearview mirror. The time for gathering evidence was over. The execution phase had officially begun. I bypassed the agency, entirely navigating the heavy afternoon traffic toward the towering glass structure of Caldwell and Associates. If I was going to war, I needed a mercenary, and Arthur Caldwell was the most ruthless corporate litigator in Austin. He did not handle standard divorces or petty civil disputes. He handled high-stakes corporate warfare, hostile takeovers, and the brutal dismantling of fraudulent enterprises. I marched past his receptionist, ignoring her protests, and walked straight into his corner office overlooking the Colorado River. Caldwell was a striking man in his late 50s, with silver hair and eyes like chipped flint. He did not offer a warm greeting as I dropped my heavy leather tote onto his massive mahogany desk. I pulled out the forged power of attorney, the newly registered Apex Event Solutions (LLC) filings, the bank statements showing the drained corporate reserve, and the $400,000 second mortgage on my home. Caldwell adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses and began to read. He did not speak for 10 solid minutes. The only sound in the cavernous office was the crisp turning of pages and the low hum of the central air conditioning. When he finally looked up, his expression was devoid of any pity. It was entirely calculating, like a shark assessing a wounded seal. "Your husband and your business partner have executed a highly sophisticated corporate raid," Caldwell said, his voice a gravelly baritone. "This is not a simple case of infidelity, Paige. This is premeditated, absolute financial ruin. I want to lock them out." I stated, my voice perfectly level, refusing to show a fraction of the terror gripping my chest. "I want to freeze the assets, terminate Blair's partnership agreement, and press criminal charges for the forged mortgage right now." Caldwell leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "We can pursue criminal charges for the forgery eventually, but if you drop that bomb today, you will trigger a massive legal grenade that will detonate right in your own face. You need to understand the brutal reality of Texas family law, Paige. We live in a community property state." "I know what community property means," I countered, crossing my arms. "What we acquire during the marriage is split equally. But the agency is mine. I built it from nothing. Liam has a separate career in wealth management. He has never worked a single day in my office. He does not know the first thing about experiential marketing." Caldwell shook his head, a grim, heavy look settling on his features. "It does not matter. You incorporated the agency 3 years after you married him. Under the law, he is legally entitled to 50% of the value of that business. If we file for divorce today, or if we sue him for fraud, the courts will immediately freeze all marital assets. Your agency accounts will be locked, your vendor payments will bounce, your payroll will fail. The business will be completely paralyzed during a lengthy discovery process." I felt a cold, leaden weight drop into my stomach. The reality of his words hit me like a physical blow. "He owns half of my company." "He owns half the value," Caldwell corrected sharply. "And right now, Liam and Blair are trying to ensure that value is absolutely zero. Look at the mechanics of this operation. They did not just steal your money. They stole your liquidity right before your biggest event of the year. They drained the emergency fund and leveraged your home to secure over $500,000 in clean, untraceable cash. Why? Because they are launching Apex Event Solutions." I answered the pieces rapidly, locking together in my mind, illuminating a picture so ugly I could barely comprehend it. "Exactly." Caldwell nodded, pointing to the LLC paperwork. "They are using your own money to build a rival agency. But a new agency needs a massive marquee client to establish legitimacy. The Tech Gala is your crown jewel. It is a $500,000 contract. Liam and Blair know that without the Tech Gala, your agency will miss its quarterly projections. You will default on your vendor lines of credit. You will be forced into corporate bankruptcy." I stared at him, the sheer malicious genius of their plan making me physically sick. "They are going to steal the Tech Gala." Caldwell leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk, his gaze piercing. "Blair is going to use her position as your co-founder to silently migrate the Tech Gala contract over to Apex Event Solutions. She will claim your agency is financially unstable, which will technically be true, since they stole your reserves. The client will jump ship to Apex to save their event. Your agency collapses. You are forced to shut the doors permanently. And what happens to Liam? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Liam files for divorce, Caldwell stated plainly, laying out the final execution. He demands his 50% share of the marital assets. But since the agency is bankrupt, it is worth nothing. He walks away clean with Blair and a highly profitable new event company funded entirely by your stolen home equity. Meanwhile, you are left holding a worthless agency, a destroyed professional reputation, and a $400,000 second mortgage that you can no longer afford to pay because your income has vanished. You will lose your house, Paige. They intend to leave you completely homeless and destitute. The silence in the office was deafening. The sheer magnitude of their cruelty was almost impossible to process. Liam did not just want out of the marriage. He wanted to strip my bones clean. He wanted to walk away with a massive fortune built on my blood, sweat, and tears, leaving me to drown in debt and public humiliation. Brenda and Sydney knew. Jamal was right. They had smiled at me over expensive salads, knowing I was being systematically led to the slaughter. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, measured breath. When I opened them, the last remaining shred of the woman who had loved Liam Wilson was dead. Only the CEO remained. If I expose the forgery now, the bank freezes my accounts and the business dies. I summarized, my voice stripped of all emotion. If I confront Blair, she accelerates the client theft and the business dies. Caldwell nodded, his expression grim. In a traditional legal battle, you lose. The law moves too slowly to save your agency from a corporate raid of this speed and precision. I stood up from the leather chair and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the bustling city below. I had spent 5 years building my empire in those streets. I was not going to let a mediocre wealth manager and a treacherous socialite take it from me. Then, we do not use traditional legal battles, I said, turning back to face the ruthless attorney. We do not freeze the accounts and we do not call the police. Not yet. Caldwell's eyes glinted with sudden, dangerous interest. What exactly are you proposing, Paige? They want to steal the tech gala. I said, a cold smile forming on my lips. Let them try. I am going to let Blair think her plan is working flawlessly. I am going to let her walk right into the venue and set up her trap. But I need you to draft a very specific set of ironclad corporate documents. I need a shadow contract. Caldwell reached for a fresh legal pad, pulling a silver pen from his breast pocket. I am listening. If Liam is entitled to 50% of my assets under community property laws, then he is also responsible for 50% of my liabilities, I stated, pacing the length of the office. They think they can bankrupt the agency and walk away clean. We are going to restructure the corporate debt. We are going to tie the financial liability of the agency directly to Liam Wilson and Apex Event Solutions. We are going to legally bind them to the very sinking ship they are trying to create. Caldwell began writing rapidly, a predatory smirk crossing his face. A poison pill. You want to weaponize the community property laws against him. I want to bury him under it, I replied, my voice echoing in the quiet room. I want to let Blair execute her grand betrayal in front of the biggest tech clients in Texas. And when the dust settles, I'm going to trigger a legal avalanche that will seize every asset they have. They wanted a massacre, Mr. Caldwell. It is time to oblige them. I returned to the agency just after 2 in the afternoon. The drive from Caldwell's office had given me 30 minutes to completely compartmentalize the fiery rage building in my chest. If I walked onto the main floor looking like a woman ready for war, Blair would instantly raise her defenses. She needed to see the pathetic abandoned wife she had engineered. I pulled my rearview mirror down and deliberately smudged the eyeliner under my lower lashes. I wiped away my lipstick, leaving my mouth pale and washed out. I let my shoulders slump forward, practicing the shallow, uneven breathing of a woman on the verge of a panic attack. I was a predator wearing the skin of a wounded animal. The moment the elevator doors opened to the top floor, the chaotic hum of the agency washed over me. Phones were ringing, assistants were rushing past with fabric swatches, but my attention was immediately drawn to the main executive boardroom. The conference room was completely encased in soundproof glass, situated right in the center of the bullpen. Through the transparent walls, I saw Blair. She was not alone. Sitting directly across from her was Julian Vance, the ruthless, highly demanding CEO of Omnitech. The tech gala was his company anniversary celebration, and he was notoriously difficult to please. Blair was leaning over the massive oak table, aggressively pointing at a set of highly detailed architectural renderings. Those were my renderings. I had spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting the spatial flow for the VIP lounge and the interactive lighting displays. Blair was currently pitching them as her own brilliant vision. She was completely bypassing me, violating every protocol we had established for managing Tier 1 clients. I pushed the heavy glass door open, the metal hinges letting out a soft hiss. The conversation stopped instantly. Julian looked up, his sharp gray eyes assessing my disheveled appearance with immediate discomfort. Blair spun around, her face instantly shifting into a mask of exaggerated, tragic sympathy. She rushed over to me, placing a warm, condescending hand on my shoulder. "Paige, what are you doing here?" she gasped, her voice pitched perfectly for Julian to hear. "I told you to stay home. You are in no condition to be working right now." She turned her head toward the CEO, offering him a tight, apologetic smile. "I am so sorry, Julian. Paige is going through a devastating sudden separation from her husband. It happened completely out of nowhere last night. She is barely holding it together." Julian shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "I am very sorry to hear that, Paige. We can reschedule if this is a bad time." "No," I said, my voice raspy and intentionally weak. "Please, continue. I just want to sit and listen." I pulled out a chair at the far end of the table, deliberately isolating myself from the presentation materials. I slumped into the seat, staring blankly at the polished wood grain, refusing to make eye contact with either of them. Blair practically vibrated with triumphant energy. I had just validated her entire narrative. I was the broken, weeping wife incapable of leading the agency. Blair returned to the head of the table, commanding the room with absolute authority. She walked Julian through the revised budget projections, casually mentioning that she had to make some emergency vendor swaps to ensure the highest quality execution. I listened in pure silence as she expertly wove Apex Event Solutions into the logistics pipeline. She was telling the CEO of our largest account that a brand new unproven vendor was handling the critical infrastructure of his $500,000 event. She framed it as an exclusive boutique partnership that she had personally secured. Julian was a pragmatist. He did not care about the name of the vendor. He only cared about the results, and Blair's boundless, enthusiastic confidence was selling the lie flawlessly. He nodded along, asking sharp logistical questions that Blair answered with practiced ease. Every word out of her mouth was a deliberate, calculated breach of her fiduciary duty to our agency. She was actively siphoning the profit margins directly into the LLC she shared with my husband right in front of my face. I kept my eyes fixed on the table, allowing my expression to remain perfectly vacant. Inside my mind was a steel trap, cataloging every single fraudulent claim, every stolen design concept, and every unauthorized contractual promise she made to Julian. I was documenting the exact parameters of her corporate treason. She thought my silence was the paralysis of a broken heart. She had no idea she was giving a masterclass in her own legal destruction. 45 minutes later, Julian stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. The presentation was over. He looked highly satisfied with the new direction. "You have everything well in hand, Blair," he said, extending his hand. "I expect a full walkthrough of the venue 2 days before the launch. You have my absolute guarantee, Julian." She beamed, shaking his hand firmly. "I will personally oversee every single detail." Julian offered me a tight, awkward nod of pity before walking out of the boardroom. The heavy glass door clicked shut, sealing Blair and me inside the quiet room. The moment we were alone, her sympathetic facade vanished completely, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated arrogance. She began stacking the design boards, aligning the edges with meticulous precision. "You really should not have come in, Paige," she said, her tone dripping with patronizing disdain. "You look absolutely dreadful." "The staff is starting to stare." I kept my gaze lowered, wrapping my arms around my waist as if trying to hold myself together. "I just do not know what to do, Blair," I whispered, letting my voice tremble. "Liam will not answer his phone. I do not understand how he could just walk away from everything we built." Blair paused, resting her hands on the table. She looked down at me, savoring her total victory. She had stolen my husband, she was actively stealing my company, and I was sitting right in front of her weeping about it. Her ego was inflating to catastrophic proportions. "Men are complicated, Paige," she sighed, adopting a philosophical tone. "Sometimes they just outgrow their surroundings. Liam needs a woman who truly understands his potential, not someone who treats him like a secondary priority. You pushed him away by focusing too much on this agency. And look where it got you. You are falling apart, and you cannot even focus on our biggest client." I looked up at her, letting a single tear spill over my lower lash line. "Are you saying I should step back?" "I am saying you need to face reality," she replied, her voice turning icy and pragmatic. "You are not fit to run this company right now. You are an emotional liability. I am going to take full control of the tech gala. I will handle the venue, the vendors, and the final billing. You go home, take a sleeping pill, cry it out. I will manage the business." She picked up the stack of folios and walked toward the door, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She did not look back. She strode out into the bullpen, her head held high, moving with the absolute certainty of a conqueror who had just claimed a new kingdom. I remained in the quiet boardroom alone. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a tissue, and calmly wiped the single tear from my cheek. I straightened my posture, rolling my shoulders back until my spine was rigid steel. I did not need to cry. I had just secured the exact timeline I needed. Blair was going to run the entire tech gala through Apex Event Solutions. She was going to execute the final billing. That was the moment the trap would spring closed. I stood up from the table, my mind perfectly clear. The victim performance was over. The massacre was scheduled for opening night. I walked out of the boardroom, leaving Blair to bask in her fabricated victory. To execute Caldwell's shadow contract, I needed exact numbers. I needed to know the precise depth of the financial grave the Wilson family was digging for themselves. I navigated through the downtown traffic, heading toward the warehouse district. I pulled into a cracked alleyway and stepped down into an underground coffee shop. It was a damp, subterranean space filled with the harsh grind of espresso machines and the anonymity of shadows. It was the exact opposite of the Westlake Country Club, making it the perfect place for treason. Jamal was already sitting in a scarred leather booth in the far corner. He wore a dark hooded jacket over his tailored dress shirt, his posture rigid with tension. He did not order a drink. As I slid into the booth opposite him, he unzipped his leather messenger bag and pulled out a sleek silver laptop, sliding it across the battered wooden table. "I crossed a major ethical line for this, Paige." Jamal said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that barely cut through the ambient noise of the cafe. "If Sydney ever finds out I bypassed our home network security to pull her mother's private financial records, my own divorce proceedings will be the least of my problems. I could lose my auditing license and face federal charges. You took the risk anyway?" I stated, my eyes locked on the glowing screen. "Why?" "Because I spent the entire weekend looking at the Apex Event Solutions corporate structure," Jamal replied, his dark eyes blazing with a mix of anger and professional disgust. "And I realize Liam and Blair are not just stealing your clients. They are using you as a blind human shield for a massive financial implosion. I cannot let them do that. Nobody deserves to be gutted the way they are gutting you. Show me what you found." Jamal leaned over the table, his fingers flying across the trackpad to highlight a series of massive wire transfers. "I tracked the initial $50,000 Brenda sent Liam. That was just the seed money to open the LLC. Once Liam forged your signature on the second mortgage for $400,000, they needed a clean way to launder that cash into Apex without triggering a red flag from your marital joint accounts. So they routed every single penny through Brenda." I stared at the columns of numbers, the sheer scale of the deception crystallizing into a terrifying picture. Brenda washed the stolen equity. "Yes," Jamal confirmed grimly. "But here is the truly insane part. $450,000 was not enough to guarantee the tech gala execution. They needed to secure premium vendor deposits, massive liability insurance policies, and luxury staging infrastructure. They needed another $1 million in liquid cash to make Apex look like an established elite agency overnight. Jamal double-clicked a new encrypted PDF. It displayed a property deed and a series of massive institutional loan agreements. Brenda mortgaged her entire retirement fund. Jamal said, his voice dropping even lower. She leveraged her unencumbered assets, her stock portfolios, and the family estate in Westlake. She signed over her entire life savings to back Liam's LLC. She is completely over-leveraged. They tied their entire family fortune to a ship they stole from you. I sat back against the cracked leather booth, the breath catching in my throat. My mother-in-law, the woman who had spent years looking down her nose at my ambition, had just bet her entire financial existence on my destruction. She had handed Liam the keys to her kingdom, fully believing he would bankrupt me and walk away a millionaire. If Apex Event Solutions fails, I said, the realization tasting like dark, rich wine on my tongue, Brenda loses everything. She goes totally bankrupt, Jamal agreed, closing the laptop with a soft, definitive click. She loses the country club membership, the estate, the retirement. It all goes up in smoke. Then we let them sail it, I said, a terrifying calm settling over my heart. Thank you, Jamal. You just handed me the final weapon. I left the coffee shop feeling an electrifying surge of absolute power. The drive back to my condo was a blur of calculated strategy. Caldwell was drafting the poison pill. Blair was setting the stage at the venue. Brenda was funding the entire delusion. Now I just needed to handle my treacherous husband. I unlocked the front door of my condo and stepped into the quiet foyer. The air was thick, carrying the faint, sour scent of stale beer and unwashed clothes. I walked slowly into the living room and stopped dead in my tracks. Liam was sitting on the beige sectional sofa. He looked absolutely pathetic. His meticulously styled hair was unkempt, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was wearing a rumpled gray hoodie that looked like it had been dragged through the mud. A half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey sat on the glass coffee table in front of him. The performance was staggering. If I had not seen the high-resolution photo of him sipping champagne on a Caribbean beach 48 hours ago, I might have actually believed the depressed, broken husband routine. Page, Liam mumbled, his voice raspy and thick with manufactured sorrow. He did not look up, keeping his gaze fixed on the floor. I am sorry. I did not know where else to go. I stood in the entryway, perfectly still, projecting an aura of weary concern. I thought you were in the woods, Liam. Finding yourself. I tried, he sighed, burying his face in his hands. But I just cannot do this anymore. The pressure, the expectations, the constant feeling that I am failing you. I am completely broken, Paige. My mental health is gone. I need out of everything. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a thick manila envelope, tossing it onto the coffee table next to the whiskey bottle. What is that? I asked, keeping my tone carefully neutral, injecting just enough hurt into my voice to feed his monumental ego. It is a separation agreement, Liam said, finally looking up at me with wide, pitiful eyes. I had a mediator draft it. It is entirely friendly. I am not asking for alimony. I am not asking for your savings. I just want a clean break. You keep your agency and I take my share of the marital debt. We just walk away. I stared at the envelope. It was the ultimate trap. He was pushing a fast, uncontested separation right before the tech gala. He wanted me to sign away my rights to scrutinize our finances, leaving me legally responsible for the forged second mortgage while he vanished into the sunset with his newly funded LLC. He was playing the sacrificial lamb to orchestrate my slaughter. I walked slowly toward the coffee table. I looked down at the man I had married. The man who was currently trying to destroy my life with a forged smile and a fake depression. I reached down and picked up the envelope. You really want to just walk away? I whispered, letting a single, perfectly timed tear slide down my cheek. It is for the best, Paige Liam replied, reaching out to gently touch my wrist. We are destroying each other. Just sign it. Let me go. I looked into his lying eyes, gripping the envelope tightly in my hand. I was going to let him go, all right. I was going to let him go straight over a financial cliff. I slid my thumb under the flap of the thick manila envelope, tearing it open with a single sharp motion. I pulled out the stack of crisp white papers. The heading printed in bold, stark letters read, Mutual Separation and Asset Division Agreement. It was exactly what Arthur Caldwell had predicted. Liam was making his move, trying to sever our legal and financial ties before the tech gala imploded, ensuring he walked away from the blast radius completely unscathed. Liam leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, attempting to project an aura of benevolent concern. It is completely standard, Paige, he said, his voice soft and patronizing. The mediator said it is the cleanest, most efficient way to handle this. You keep the agency entirely. I take the second mortgage on the house. We do not need expensive lawyers tearing us apart and draining our accounts. We can just sign it, get it notarized by my friend at the bank tomorrow morning, and be done. It is a clean break. I stared at the pages, letting my eyes scan the dense paragraphs of legal boilerplate. He was offering to absorb a $400,000 debt. To a devastated, grieving wife, it would look like a final act of guilt-driven generosity. A man falling on his sword to protect the woman he was leaving. But I knew the absolute truth. He was taking the debt because that debt was the seed money for Apex Event Solutions. If he assumed the liability in our separation agreement, he effectively legitimized the stolen funds as his personal capital. It would legally separate the cash from my agency, protecting his new venture with Blair from any future corporate claims I might try to make. It was a brilliant strategy born of pure malice. But Arthur Caldwell was infinitely more brilliant and vastly more ruthless. Before leaving Caldwell's office earlier that afternoon, we had anticipated this exact psychological play. Caldwell had drafted a counter-agreement. Visually, it was an identical twin to a standard mediator template. The font, the margins, the spacing, and the pagination were completely indistinguishable from the document currently resting in my hands. But the legal mechanics buried deep within the seemingly mundane clauses were a masterpiece of corporate execution. Caldwell's version contained an airtight cross-collateralization and indemnification clause. It legally stipulated that by accepting the home equity debt, Liam was personally assuming full individual liability for any and all financial damages, corporate deficits, or breach of contract penalties incurred by the agency during our transition period. It specifically waived his right to corporate protection. If my agency failed, the financial liability bypassed the corporate veil and transferred directly to him and any affiliated business entities he established. By signing Caldwell's document, Liam would be legally binding himself to the very destruction he was trying to orchestrate. He was essentially co-signing his own financial execution. I let the papers fall to the glass coffee table and covered my face with my hands. I forced my shoulders to shake, pulling up every ounce of exhaustion and betrayal from the past 5 years to fuel the performance. I cannot even look at this right now, Liam. I sobbed, my voice cracking perfectly. My head is pounding. I feel like I cannot breathe. Everything is falling apart. He shifted closer on the sofa, patting my back with awkward, heavy hands. I know, Paige. I know. I am so sorry to put you through this. You have been working so hard. Do you want a glass of water? Please. I choked out, pointing weakly toward the kitchen. There is some aspirin in the cabinet above the sink. My vision is blurring. Liam stood up, immediately eager to play the caretaking husband one last time to assuage his own monumental ego. He wanted to feel like the good guy, gently guiding his broken wife toward the exit. The moment his back turned and he crossed the threshold into the kitchen, I moved with lethal, precise speed. I reached into my heavy leather tote bag resting on the floor and pulled out the identical stack of papers Caldwell had prepared. I snatched Liam's original document from the table, slid it deep into my bag, and dropped the rigged agreement onto the glass exactly where the original had been. I smoothed the edges so it sat perfectly square. The entire swap took less than 3 seconds. Liam returned a moment later carrying a glass of ice water and 2 white pills. He set them down beside the document, completely oblivious to the lethal landmine now sitting in his living room. I swallowed the pills and took a long, shaky sip of water, gripping the glass with trembling fingers. I picked up the black ink pen he had left on the table. "Are you absolutely sure this is what you want?" I asked, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. "After everything we built together, you just want to throw it all away and leave me here." He gave a heavy theatrical sigh, rubbing his jaw and looking at the ceiling. "It is the only way, Paige. We are toxic for each other right now. You need to focus on your business without me dragging you down, and I need to figure out who I am. Signing this gives us both the freedom we need. It protects you from my mess." I nodded slowly, letting a fresh tear drop directly onto the signature line of the first page. "Okay, Liam," I whispered. "If this is what you really want." I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. I flipped to the final page and signed again. I slid the document across the glass table toward him, pushing the pen along with it. Liam did not even glance at the text. He did not check the page numbers or scan the paragraphs. He was so blinded by his own narcissism, so intoxicated by the belief that he had successfully manipulated his emotionally unstable wife, that he simply grabbed the pen. He signed his name with a quick, aggressive flourish, permanently executing the document. He gathered the papers, tapping the edges against the table to straighten them, before tucking them carefully back into the manila envelope. "I will take these to the notary first thing tomorrow morning," he said, his voice lighter, infused with the sudden relief of a man who thinks he just got away with murder. "I'm going to grab a few bags of clothes from upstairs. I will stay at a hotel for a while so you can have the house to yourself." "Okay," I whispered, staring blankly at the floor. I sat motionless on the sofa and listened to his footsteps retreat up the hardwood stairs. The moment he was out of sight, the trembling in my hands stopped entirely. My tears dried instantly. The suffocating, stale air of the condo felt suddenly crisp and invigorating. Liam thought he had just secured his freedom and his golden future with Blair. He thought he had outsmarted me and stripped me of my defenses. He had absolutely no idea he had just legally chained himself to the anchor of a sinking ship. He had just signed away every asset his mother had leveraged and every dollar Apex Event Solutions would ever generate. The psychological trap had snapped shut with devastating precision, and he had happily handed me the lock. I listened to the heavy thud of the front door closing as Liam walked out of the condo. The metallic click of the deadbolt was the sound of a steel cage dropping over his future. I remained on the sofa for 10 minutes, allowing the silence to wrap around me. Then I carefully picked up the manila envelope containing the original, unadulterated separation agreement he thought he had just signed. I slid it through the shredder in my home office, watching the sharp blades turn his escape plan into meaningless paper ribbons. I placed Caldwell's executed contract into my fireproof safe. The trap was set. Now I needed to give them the keys to the castle. The next morning, I arrived at the agency at 9 sharp. I had spent 30 minutes meticulously applying makeup to achieve a hollow, exhausted look. I used a grayish contour powder under my cheekbones and deliberately skipped my mascara. I wore an oversized beige cashmere sweater that swallowed my frame, making me look fragile and diminished. When I walked onto the main floor, the usual chaotic energy of the bullpen dropped by several decibels. The staff could smell blood in the water. Rumors of my marital implosion and erratic behavior had clearly been circulating courtesy of Blair. I bypassed my private office and walked directly to the center of the open floor. I clapped my hands together twice, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. "Listen up, everyone," I said, my voice lacking its usual commanding edge. "I need you to gather around for a brief morning meeting." Desks pushed back and chairs rolled across the polished concrete floor as the team assembled. Blair stood near the front, her arms crossed over her tailored emerald green sheath dress. Her face was a mask of practiced concern, but her eyes glittered with predatory anticipation. She knew something was coming. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump. I looked down at my hands, rubbing my bare ring finger where my wedding band used to sit. As many of you may have noticed, I have not been operating at my usual capacity. I began keeping my tone fragile and quiet, forcing them to lean in to hear me. The last few weeks have been incredibly difficult for me on a personal level. I have pushed myself to the breaking point, trying to manage my private life while maintaining the standard of excellence this agency requires. But I have to face reality. I am suffering from severe burnout. My doctor has made it very clear that if I do not step away immediately, my physical and mental health will completely collapse. A collective murmur rippled through the staff. Several of the junior designers exchanged shocked glances. I raised my hand to quiet them. Effective immediately, I am taking an indefinite medical leave of absence, I announced. I will not be answering emails. I will not be taking client calls. I need to disconnect entirely to survive this. I turned my gaze directly to Blair. She practically vibrated with adrenaline. Because of the critical timing, I continued, my voice wavering perfectly. I cannot leave our clients in limbo. The Omnitech Gala is the most important event in our agency history. It requires a leader who is fully present and sharp. Blair. I need you to step up. I am handing full operational and financial control of the Tech Gala directly to you. You are the point person for Julian Vance. You authorize the vendor payments. You manage the venue logistics. The entire account is yours until I return. Blair stepped forward, placing a warm, comforting hand on my arm. She looked at the staff, adopting a tone of solemn leadership. Paige, we are all so incredibly sorry you are going through this, Blair said, her voice dripping with fake empathy. Your health is the absolute priority. Do not worry about a single thing here. I will take the reins. We will execute the gala flawlessly and make you proud. You just focus on healing. Thank you, Blair, I whispered, looking away as if overcome by emotion. I know the agency is in capable hands. I turned and walked to my office, packing a single cardboard box with a few personal items. A framed photo of my dog, a customized fountain pen, and a vintage paperweight. I did not take any files or client dossiers. I left my dual monitors glowing with an empty desktop. I was walking away from my own company, and the staff watched me go with silent pity. Blair escorted me to the elevator, her hand resting supportively on the small of my back, a visual confirmation to the entire bullpen that she was now the undisputed authority. Take all the time you need, Paige, she murmured as the elevator doors slid open. We have got it covered. I nodded, keeping my eyes downcast, and stepped into the cab. The stainless steel doors closed, severing my connection to the agency floor. I walked out of the building and crossed the street, settling into the shadowed alcove of a closed boutique. I pulled out my phone and accessed the security feed for my private office. Months ago, I had installed an invisible micro camera behind the ventilation grate above my desk, originally meant to monitor the cleaning staff who had a habit of misplacing client checks. Now it provided a front-row seat to my own corporate assassination. Through the high-definition feed on my screen, I watched Blair enter my office. She walked directly behind my massive mahogany desk and sat down in my high-backed leather executive chair. She spun around once, testing the weight and authority of the seat. Less than 5 minutes later, the door opened again. Liam walked in. He had parked in the rear loading dock, sneaking up through the freight elevator to avoid the main staff. He wore a sharp navy suit and a triumphant grin. The depressed, broken husband routine had vanished entirely. He walked up to the desk and leaned over, bracing his hands on the polished wood. She signed it, he said, his voice crackling slightly over the audio feed. She signed the separation agreement last night. I dropped it with the notary this morning. The debt is isolated and she has zero claim to the new company. Blair let out a sharp, victorious laugh, throwing her head back. She just handed me the tech gala in front of the entire staff, Liam. Full financial control. She literally begged me to take the account. She is so completely shattered she did not even ask to see the vendor transition logs. Liam walked around the desk and pulled her into a deep kiss, his hands tangling in her hair. It is ours, he murmured against her mouth. Apex Event Solutions has exclusive control over a $500,000 budget. We route the venue and staging costs through Apex, heavily inflated, and pocket the margin. By the time she comes back from her little medical vacation, the gala will be over. The profits will be in our offshore accounts, and her agency will be holding the bag for the inflated vendor invoices. We did it, Blair whispered, tracing his jawline. We completely broke her. I stood in the cold shadow of the alcove, staring at the digital feed on my phone. They were celebrating their absolute victory in my office, sitting in my chair plotting the final details of their theft. They thought they had secured a flawless execution. They thought my medical leave was the final nail in my coffin. I turned off the feed and slipped the phone into my pocket, a cold, genuine smile spreading across my face. They were absolutely right about one thing. I had completely broken. But I had not broken down. I had broken free. The financial explosives were planted, the fuses were lit, and they had just locked themselves inside the vault. All I had to do now was wait for the gala. All I had to do now was wait for the gala. But waiting did not mean sitting idle. I needed the final piece of the guillotine firmly in place, and that required the willing participation of the executioner himself. I could not let Julian Vance walk into the Omnitech anniversary celebration blind to the parasitic infection draining his budget. I bypassed his perimeter of executive assistants using a direct emergency cell number I had secured during our initial contract negotiations months prior. I sent a single encrypted text requesting 30 minutes of his time at a secure location of his choosing, guaranteeing it concerned a critical financial breach regarding his event. Julian, being a man who valued risk mitigation above all else, responded within 3 minutes. He instructed me to meet him at a private aviation hangar on the outskirts of the city. I arrived at the airfield just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows across the tarmac. Julian was waiting inside a pristine white hangar standing beneath the wing of a sleek corporate jet. His posture was rigid, his sharp gray eyes assessing me as I approached. I did not look like the weeping broken woman from the boardroom. I wore a tailored black suit, my hair pulled back tightly into a severe knot, my expression absolute stone. The wounded animal routine had served its purpose. I was back to being the predator. I did not waste his time with pleasantries. I unzipped my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick-bound portfolio, sliding it across the metal work table separating us. Inside was Jamal's masterpiece. The forensic audit traced every single dollar Blair had authorized since taking full operational control of the account. Julian opened the file, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the first page of executive summaries. I walked him through the devastating math. I showed him exactly how Blair had systematically canceled our vetted premium vendors and replaced them with shell companies operating under the Apex Event Solutions umbrella. She was billing Omnitech for rare imported orchids, but sourcing cheap local florals. She was charging for top-tier union staging crews while hiring unlicensed day laborers. She had downgraded the catering, the lighting, and the security infrastructure while inflating the invoices by 40%. The massive variance was being siphoned directly into the LLC my husband managed. Blair was actively embezzling Omnitech's money to fund her illicit partnership using the gala as her personal offshore bank account. Julian did not yell. He did not slam his fist on the table. His reaction was far more terrifying. A cold, deadly stillness settled over his features. To a man of his caliber, theft was not just a crime, it was a profound insult to his intelligence. He traced the routing numbers with his index finger, his jaw clenching so tightly a muscle feathered in his cheek. He looked up at me, his gray eyes burning with suppressed fury, ready to unleash his massive corporate legal team to shut the entire gala down immediately and have Blair arrested before morning. I stopped him. I looked him dead in the eye and pitched a much more satisfying destruction. I told him that shutting the event down now would only result in a messy, quiet settlement. Blair and Liam would scurry away like roaches, claim administrative errors, and attempt to rebuild their scam elsewhere. I offered him a public spectacle instead. If he allowed the gala to proceed, we would have them legally tethered to full execution fraud. The vendor contracts were already signed. The financial liability was now completely attached to Liam, thanks to the rigged separation agreement he had blindly executed. I promised Julian that his anniversary gala would still be the flawless elite event he demanded. I revealed that I had secretly retained the original premium vendors on standby, paying their deposits out of my own pocket to ensure Omnitech's reputation remained absolutely spotless. When Apex Event Solutions failed to deliver on opening night, my crew would be waiting in the wings to seamlessly execute the real event. Julian stared at me, absorbing the sheer magnitude of the trap I had built. He saw the genius in the architecture. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. He agreed to play the blissful, oblivious client. He would attend the gala, shake Blair's hand, and applaud her vision right up until the moment we dropped the anvil. The Shadow Alliance was forged in that quiet hangar, sealed with a firm, decisive handshake. The eve of the Omnitech Gala arrived with a heavy, suffocating tension. I was at the condo packing the last of my personal belongings into a large suitcase. I was officially moving out, leaving the marital home to the ghosts of our dead relationship. I heard the front door unlock and heavy footsteps echo in the foyer. Liam strolled into the living room, looking vibrant and aggressively alive. He practically glowed with the arrogant energy of a man who believed he had just conquered the world. He was stopping by to pick up his custom-tailored tuxedo for the event tomorrow. He paused, leaning against the bedroom doorframe, watching me fold a sweater. He offered a condescending, theatrical sigh. He shook his head, adopting a tone of pity that made my skin crawl. "It really is a shame, Paige," he said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "I warned you years ago that you were pushing yourself too hard. You just never knew how to handle the pressure. The business world requires a certain type of resilience, and you simply shattered under the weight. Taking a medical leave right before the biggest event of your career is a tragic failure." He walked over to the closet and pulled his tuxedo from the rack, examining the lapels. "But do not worry," he continued, buttoning the protective garment bag. "Blair is handling it beautifully. She really stepped up when you tapped out. She has the vision and the stamina to take the agency to the next level. You just focus on resting. Maybe you can find a nice, quiet hobby." I absorbed every insult, every patronizing word with total, absolute calm. I zipped my suitcase closed and turned to face him. I did not argue. I did not defend my resilience or scream about his betrayal. I simply looked at the man who had traded his soul for a stolen company and offered him a simple, serene smile. "You are absolutely right, Liam," I said, my voice soft and perfectly steady. "Tomorrow night will be the ultimate proof of your superior vision. I cannot wait to see how it all unfolds for you." The Omnitech Gala was held at the Apex Pavilion, a massive glass and steel architectural marvel situated right in the beating heart of downtown Austin. By 7 in the evening, the Texas heat had given way to a balmy night, and the venue was completely illuminated by sweeping columns of blue and silver light. From my vantage point in the enclosed mezzanine control booth, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire floor. I sat in a high-backed leather chair, bathed in the glow of the audio mixing boards and surveillance monitors. I wore a simple black turtleneck and dark slacks, blending seamlessly into the shadows of the tech bay. The lead sound engineer, a loyal contractor I had personally hired years ago, had quietly smuggled me up the service stairwell. I was entirely invisible to the world below. The ambient hum of the crowd swelled as the main doors opened wider, signaling the arrival of the 500 elite guests. This was the pinnacle of the Austin tech scene. Venture capitalists, software billionaires, and city officials mingled on the polished marble floor, holding flutes of vintage champagne. Valets rushed to park an endless stream of luxury vehicles at the front entrance. The sheer magnitude of wealth and influence concentrated in this single room was staggering. Julian Vance had demanded a night of unparalleled sophistication to celebrate his company's anniversary, and the initial visual impact was undeniably striking. But from my elevated sanctuary, the cracks in the facade were glaringly obvious. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cool metal of the console, cataloging every fraudulent substitution Blair had made. My original design called for cascades of rare imported white orchids suspended above the central bar. Instead, Blair had ordered cheap local hydrangeas, masking their inferior quality with aggressive blue uplighting. The custom velvet drapery I had sourced to line the perimeter of the room had been replaced by flimsy synthetic fabric that hung stiffly against the glass walls. Even the staging area where Julian was scheduled to speak looked precarious. The seamless acrylic floor I had budgeted for was gone, replaced by painted plywood constructed by the unlicensed day laborers she had hired to cut costs. Every cheap floral arrangement and every synthetic drape was a physical manifestation of her embezzlement. I watched one of the high-definition camera monitors as Blair and Liam made their grand entrance. They did not just walk into the room they paraded. Blair was dressed in a breathtaking crimson couture gown that plunged aggressively at the neckline and hugged every curve of her body. She wore a heavy diamond necklace that caught the ambient light, throwing fractured prisms across her collarbones. She clung tightly to Liam's arm, projecting the image of a fiercely protective visionary partner. Liam walked beside her in his custom-tailored tuxedo, his shoulders squared, his chest puffed out with total absolute hubris. He was grinning, flashing his perfect teeth at the photographers, and shaking hands with the tech executives he recognized from my client roster. They moved through the crowd like conquering royalty, floating on a toxic cloud of stolen money and blind arrogance. Blair navigated the room with practiced ease, directing the waitstaff with sharp snaps of her fingers and leaning in to whisper intimately with key investors. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime, acting as the sole creative genius who had pulled off this multi-million-dollar event despite the tragic sudden absence of her emotionally unstable agency director. I watched Liam kiss her cheek, playing the role of the supportive new business partner. They were publicly launching the soft opening of Apex Event Solutions right in front of 500 people, and they thought they were utterly invincible. I shifted my gaze from the monitor to the live floor, looking down at the VIP seating section directly in front of the main stage. The front row was a semicircle of plush white leather lounge chairs, reserved for Omnitech's board of directors and the highest-tier guests. Sitting right in the center, radiating a foul, smug arrogance, were Brenda and Sydney. My mother-in-law had dressed for a coronation. Brenda wore a metallic silver evening gown and a string of pearls that looked heavy enough to choke her. She sat with her legs elegantly crossed, sipping a signature cocktail and surveying the room with absolute possession. She leaned over to Sydney, pointing a manicured finger at the impressive lighting rig above the stage, clearly taking credit for the grandeur of the event her money had supposedly financed. She had leveraged her entire retirement fund, her stock portfolio, and her estate to bankroll this delusion, and she currently believed every single penny was paying off. Sydney sat beside her, practically vibrating with unearned triumph. She wore a tight emerald cocktail dress and spent every 30 seconds panning her phone across the crowd, recording videos for her social media. I could easily imagine the captions she was typing, bragging about her brother's massive new empire and the elite circles their family was now commanding. Sydney waved frantically as Liam and Blair approached the VIP section. The four of them clustered together, clinking their champagne glasses in a celebratory toast. I put on a pair of noise-canceling headphones and tapped into the live microphone feed positioned near their table. The crisp audio of their conversation flooded my ears. "You outdid yourself, Blair," Brenda said, her voice dripping with maternal pride. "The room looks absolutely spectacular. I always knew Liam needed a woman with real ambition to help him reach his true potential." "It was a team effort," Brenda Blair replied, offering a flawless, humble smile. "Liam handled all the major vendor negotiations. We work perfectly together. Once the final checks clear from Omnitech next week, we will officially file the incorporation papers for Apex. This is just the beginning." Sydney laughed, a sharp, grating sound. "Wait until Paige sees the photos from tonight. She is probably sitting in that dark condo crying into a box of cheap wine." She actually thought she could hold Liam back. Liam chuckled, sipping his champagne. "She signed the separation papers yesterday. She is completely out of the picture. By the time she realizes what actually happened, we will already own the Austin market." I sat back in my chair in the darkened control booth, the glow of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. I listened to them divide my spoils and mock my manufactured depression. They were so deeply entrenched in their own vanity that they could not see the executioner's blade suspended directly over their necks. The 500 guests began to take their seats, finding their places around the perimeter of the stage. The lights in the grand atrium slowly dimmed, signaling the start of the formal presentation. I reached out and gently rested my finger on the master audio switch. The parade of arrogance was over. The trap was locked. I was completely ready to watch them burn. I pressed the master audio switch. A low, pulsating bass note reverberated through the massive glass atrium, perfectly synchronized with a sweep of crystalline blue lasers slicing through the darkness. The crowd fell into an expectant hush as the ambient lighting shifted to a deep, dramatic violet. A booming pre-recorded voiceover filled the venue, introducing the creative director of the evening. Blair emerged from the shadow stage, right walking up the short flight of lucite stairs to the center of the plywood platform. A single crisp spotlight snapped onto her, illuminating the crimson silk of her couture gown. She looked like a conqueror stepping onto foreign shores, her posture radiating an absolute, unshakable superiority. She gripped the microphone with both hands, taking a slow, deliberate breath to command the room before speaking. "Good evening, everyone." She began, her voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system with a perfectly calibrated mix of warmth and authority. "Welcome to the Omnitech Anniversary Gala. Looking out at all of you tonight, I am overwhelmed by what we have achieved together." She paused, letting the silence stretch for dramatic effect. She was not just speaking to the crowd, she was absorbing their energy, feeding on the validation she believed she had rightfully stolen. "When we began designing this event months ago, I had a very specific vision." Blair continued pacing slowly across the stage. Her designer heels clicked sharply against the cheap wooden floorboards beneath her. "In the fast-paced world of technology, you all understand that true innovation requires bold execution. It requires stepping entirely outside the boundaries of what is safe and pushing relentlessly toward what is extraordinary." She gestured broadly, encompassing the cheap synthetic drapes and the lackluster floral arrangements as if they were masterpieces of modern art. Transforming this massive space was an immense creative challenge. It required round-the-clock logistics and a refusal to compromise on excellence. Down in the front row, Liam nodded in profound agreement, raising his champagne flute in a silent toast to his brilliant partner. Brenda was sitting up perfectly straight, actually dabbing the corner of her eye with a cocktail napkin, visibly overwhelmed by the sheer brilliance of the woman she believed was about to make her son a wealthy tycoon. Sydney was holding her phone high, recording the entire speech live, broadcasting Blair's stolen glory directly to her social media followers. They were a portrait of pure, unadulterated greed, basking in the glow of a victory they had not earned. From my vantage point in the elevated booth, I shifted my gaze to Julian Vance, seated at the primary executive table just feet from the stage. He was swirling a glass of sparkling water, his posture relaxed, but his sharp gray eyes were completely dead. He watched Blair parade across the stage with the cold, clinical detachment of a predator observing its prey. He was letting her hang herself with her own words, allowing her to weave a web of undeniable liability in front of 500 high-profile witnesses. "There were moments when the pressure seemed insurmountable," Blair said, offering the crowd a soft, self-deprecating chuckle. "There were moments when traditional leadership might have buckled under the weight of such a monumental task. But in this industry, you do not stop when things get difficult. When unforeseen personal circumstances threatened to derail this entire project, when previous management found themselves entirely unable to withstand the demands of this magnitude, I made a promise to Julian. I promised that I would not let this anniversary falter. I took the reins because that is what true visionary partners do." I sat in the darkness of the control booth, resting my chin on my hands, absolutely captivated by her performance. It was a masterpiece of narcissistic self-destruction. By explicitly claiming full control and ownership of the event's execution, she was publicly confirming to the CEO of a major tech conglomerate that she was solely responsible for every decision, every vendor, and every stolen dollar spent on this gala. She was establishing her absolute legal and financial liability, and she was doing it into a live microphone. Blair gripped the microphone stand, leaning in closer to the audience, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. This gala represents more than just a celebration of Omnitech's glorious past. It represents an evolution, a critical turning point. In business, as in life, you must evolve or you will inevitably be left behind. The event industry is changing rapidly, and we must adapt to meet the complex demands of visionary clients like you. She paused, glancing down at Liam in the front row. They shared a look of pure electric triumph. It was the look of two thieves who believed they had successfully cracked the safe and were now standing amidst the gold. Tonight, I am not just celebrating Omnitech, Blair announced, her voice swelling with manufactured pride. I am thrilled to share a glimpse into our own future. The agency you have known, the agency that brought you here tonight, is undergoing a massive transformation. We are shedding the outdated practices of the past and moving forward with a bold, entirely new identity. She was doing it. She was actually going to announce Apex Event Solutions right here on Julian Vance's stage. She was going to use his corporate anniversary to publicly absorb my client list, my reputation, and my budget into her fraudulent LLC before the night was even over. The sheer breathtaking audacity of her plan was almost impressive. She took a deep breath, her chest expanding, her face glowing under the white-hot beam of the spotlight, preparing to deliver the final killing blow to my legacy. Effective. Next week, she declared, her voice ringing clear and loud across the silent room. We will be officially launching the next era of elite event management. We will be bringing you a level of service and innovation that this city has never seen. I leaned forward in the leather chair, my finger hovering directly over the main auxiliary switch on the soundboard. The trap was fully loaded. She had taken credit for the entire fraudulent production. She had insulted my resilience and praised her own non-existent genius. She had gathered the most powerful people in the city to witness her ascension. The tension in the room peaked as she prepared to speak the name of her stolen company into existence. I slammed my finger down on the master auxiliary kill switch. The heavy thud of the audio feed cutting out echoed like a gunshot through the silent atrium. Blair stood center stage, her mouth open, preparing to form the word Apex, but the stadium speakers offered only a deafening hollow pop. She tapped the silver mesh of the microphone twice. A harsh feedback squeal pierced the air, making several guests in the front row wince. She offered a tight, practiced smile toward the sound booth, assuming a simple technical glitch. She had no idea the glitch was intentional and lethal. Julian Vance stood up from his front row table. He did not rush. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of an apex predator closing in on a wounded kill. He buttoned his suit jacket, smoothing the lapels as he walked past Liam, who was still sitting with a frozen, bewildered grin. Julian ascended the lucite stairs. Blair stepped aside, gesturing toward him with the dead microphone, assuming the CEO was stepping up to offer a spontaneous congratulatory toast. She even leaned in, expecting an embrace or a handshake. Julian walked right past her. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a sleek black wireless microphone perfectly synced to my isolated channel in the control booth. "Thank you, Blair," Julian said, his deep voice booming flawlessly across the room. "That was an incredibly enlightening speech. It takes a remarkable amount of courage to stand before a room of industry leaders and claim absolute total responsibility for every single detail of this event." He turned to face the audience. "As a technology company, Omnitech relies on data. We trust hard numbers. We verify everything. And tonight, we have some very interesting data to share regarding the evolution of event management that Blair just promised you." Julian did not look at the control booth, but he gave a subtle, sharp nod. I slammed my hand down on the lighting board. The entire venue plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. A collective gasp rippled through the sea of 500 elite guests. For 3 agonizing seconds, the atrium was a black void. Then the massive panoramic LED screens that wrapped the perimeter of the room roared to life. They did not display the silver Omnitech anniversary logo. They illuminated the room with stark, glaring, high-definition spreadsheets. It was Jamal's forensic audit, magnified to 30 feet tall. Red circles highlighted massive financial discrepancies. Side by side, images dominated the screens. On the left, the invoice for imported rare white orchids billing Omnitech for $50,000. On the right, the actual purchase order for cheap local hydrangeas, totaling $6,000. The screens cycled rapidly. The invoice for union staging crews, juxtaposed against the cash receipts for unlicensed day laborers. The custom velvet drapery cost analysis displayed right next to the synthetic fabric manufacturing tags. And right in the center of the main display, blinking in bright crimson text, was the destination for all the stolen margins Apex Event Solutions. Julian paced the stage, bathed in the blue and white glow of the financial evidence. What you are looking at, ladies and gentlemen, is a masterclass in corporate embezzlement, he announced, his voice dripping with icy contempt. Miss Blair here just proudly took credit for an operation that has systematically siphoned 40% of our event budget into a fraudulent shell company. She promised you a new era of elite event management. Instead, she delivered synthetic drapes, plywood staging, and discount catering while pocketing the massive variance. The silence in the room shattered. A wave of shocked whispers rolled through the crowd of venture capitalists and software billionaires. These were people who destroyed competitors for breakfast. They recognized a public execution when they saw one. I looked down at the VIP section. The arrogance had been completely ripped from Liam's face. He sat paralyzed, his jaw slack, his skin a sickly, chalky gray. He stared up at the massive LED screens, reading the name of his own LLC broadcast as a criminal enterprise. Beside him, Brenda was clutching her heavy diamond necklace, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Sydney had dropped her phone. The live broadcast to her followers had captured the exact moment their new empire turned into a federal crime scene. On stage, Blair looked physically ill. The color had drained entirely from her face, leaving her crimson dress looking like a cruel joke. She stumbled backward away from Julian, shaking her head wildly. Julian, her voice was a thin, desperate squeak, barely picking up on his microphone. Julian, there is a mistake. There is a terrible misunderstanding. I can explain the vendor transitions. Julian stopped pacing. He turned slowly, pinning her under his cold gray stare. The only misunderstanding here is your belief that Omnitech is run by fools, he stated, his voice slicing through the murmuring crowd like a scalpel. You stood on my stage and claimed full operational control. You took credit for this theft. Therefore, effective immediately, your contract is terminated for gross fraud and breach of fiduciary trust. Blair swayed on her designer heels, her perfectly manicured hands trembling as she reached out. Julian stepped back out of her reach. Our corporate legal team has already forwarded this entire audit to the district attorney's office. Julian continued loud enough for the entire room to hear. The authorities are currently reviewing the wire transfers to Apex Event Solutions. You are not an innovator, Blair. You are a common thief who attempted to use my company as a personal bank account. Get off my stage. Blair stood frozen, trapped in the unforgiving glare of the massive spreadsheets detailing her crimes. She looked down at Liam, pleading silently for him to do something to save her, but Liam could not move. He was staring at the routing numbers on the screens, realizing that the stolen money was sitting in an account with his name on it. He remembered the cross-collateralization clause Caldwell had buried in the separation agreement. He realized he was legally and financially bound to this massive corporate disaster. Up in the control booth, I leaned back in my leather chair, crossing my arms over my chest. The guillotine had dropped with flawless precision. I watched Julian deliver the final blow and knew my cue had arrived. I stood up from the leather chair in the darkened control booth and smoothed the lapels of my black suit. I bypassed the service stairs and walked directly to the glass elevator that descended straight down to the rear of the main stage. The atrium below was a chaotic symphony of gasps, frantic whispers, and the harsh glare of camera flashes. The elite tech crowd smelled blood, and they were feasting on the spectacle. The elevator doors slid open with a soft, metallic chime. I stepped out onto the plywood stage, my heels striking the cheap wood with slow, deliberate rhythm. The lighting technician, right on cue, tracked a secondary spotlight directly onto me. I emerged from the shadows, completely shattering the illusion of the fragile, broken woman I had played for the last month. My posture was rigid, my chin held high, and my expression was absolute stone. Blair spun around at the sound of my approach. The remaining color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and sickly against the crimson silk of her couture gown. She took a stumbling step backward, her hands shaking wildly. Down in the front row, Liam scrambled out of his plush VIP chair. His face contorted into a hideous mask of confusion, rage, and dawning absolute dread. I walked past Blair without giving her a single glance and stepped up to the lucite podium. I picked up the microphone Julian had abandoned. "You wanted to run an empire, Blair," I said, my voice projecting crisp and lethal across the dead, silent room. "But you forgot the golden rule of corporate theft. You always check the liability clause before you sign your name." I turned my gaze down to Liam, who was gripping the edge of the stage. "You both thought you were brilliant," I continued, locking eyes with my husband. "You thought you could force me into a medical leave, hijack the most lucrative account in my portfolio, and siphon the profits into your offshore shell company. But in your desperate, greedy rush to secure the bag, Blair made a fatal administrative error." I looked back at the massive LED screen still broadcasting the damning audit logs. "To legitimize your new venture, Blair aggressively signed every single vendor contract, venue agreement, staging invoice, and security deposit under the name Apex Event Solutions. She wanted all the credit to establish your brand. She legally bound your LLC to over $2 million in operational costs." Liam opened his mouth to speak, his hands gripping his hair, but I cut him off. "Apex is an LLC," he stammered, his voice cracking with panic. "It is a limited liability company, Paige. You cannot touch our personal assets. We are protected." I let a slow, cold smile spread across my face. "Not anymore, Liam." I leaned into the microphone. "Remember that separation agreement you rushed to sign yesterday morning? The one you barely skimmed because you were too busy gloating about how easily you manipulated your exhausted wife. You thought you were cleverly absorbing a $400,000 debt to legitimize your stolen funds. But the document you actually executed contained an airtight cross-collateralization clause." Liam's knees actually buckled slightly. He grabbed the stage to steady himself as the legal reality crashed down on him. "By signing that contract, I announced to the room you personally assumed full individual liability for any and all corporate deficits incurred by the agency during our transition. You explicitly waived your corporate veil. And since Mr. Vance just legally terminated your Omnitech contract for gross fraud, Apex Event Solutions currently has exactly zero incoming revenue." I paused, letting the silence stretch, amplifying the sheer magnitude of their destruction. "You have no income, Liam, but you still have $2 million in binding vendor contracts that Blair eagerly signed. You owe the florists, the caterers, the staging crews, and the venue. And because of the document you executed yesterday, that $2 million debt bypasses the LLC and transfers directly to you. You are personally on the hook for millions. Every asset you own, every bank account you possess, and every single penny your mother leveraged to fund this venture is completely wiped out. You are financially ruined." A collective shudder went through the crowd. Down in the VIP section, the reality of my words finally hit Brenda. She let out a piercing, hysterical shriek that echoed off the glass walls. She threw her hands in the air, dropping her champagne glass to shatter on the marble floor. "My money," she screamed, her voice tearing with raw panic. "My retirement. Liam, you promised me it was safe." Brenda collapsed heavily onto the white leather sofa, sobbing violently into her hands. Sydney dropped her phone, staring at her mother and brother in total, absolute horror. Her social media broadcast had just captured the financial execution of their entire family. Right on cue, the heavy oak doors at the back of the atrium swung open with a resounding crash. 4 plainclothes state financial investigators, flanked by 2 uniformed Austin police officers, marched down the center aisle. Julian Vance's corporate legal team had not wasted a single second. The crowd parted instantly, creating a wide, clear path for the authorities. Blair let out a pathetic, whimpering sob as the officers ascended the stairs. She shrank away from them, holding her hands up in a futile gesture of surrender. An investigator pulled out a pair of handcuffs, while another calmly began reciting her Miranda rights. Liam did not even try to run. He stood frozen at the base of the stage, watching his partner get cuffed as two more officers approached him. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and hollow, stripped of every ounce of his narcissism and pride. "You destroyed us," he whispered, his voice barely audible over Brenda's hysterical sobbing. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but the cold, clean rush of victory. "I did not destroy you, Liam," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "I just handed you the pen. You destroyed yourselves." I stepped back from the podium and watched as the police escorted them out of the pavilion, marching them straight through the crowd of elite executives they had tried to conquer. The flashbulbs erupted, blinding and relentless, capturing their humiliating exit. I turned and walked back toward the glass elevator, leaving the Omnitech Gala exactly as I had intended, an unforgettable public spectacle. The glass doors of the elevator closed, sealing off the chaos of the Apex Pavilion. I descended to the ground floor in complete silence, the adrenaline of the past hour settling into a deep, unshakable calm. Outside, the humid Texas night air hit my face as I slipped into the back of the waiting town car Julian Vance had arranged for me. The driver did not ask for a destination. He already knew we were heading straight to the downtown Austin police precinct. The corporate attorneys were waiting, and I needed to be present for the formal filing of the civil charges to ensure the financial lockdown was absolute. The downtown precinct was a stark, brutal contrast to the sweeping glass and luxury of the gala. Harsh white fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly pallor over the scuffed linoleum floors. The air smelled strongly of stale coffee, cheap floor wax, and pervasive desperation. I walked through the heavy double doors into the main holding area, accompanied by Marcus Julian Vance's lead litigator. We did not even have to ask the desk sergeant where the Omnitech suspects were located. We could hear them echoing down the cinderblock corridor. The booking area was a wide-open space partitioned by reinforced glass and steel caging. Against the far wall, a long metal bench was bolted directly to the concrete. Liam and Blair were sitting 10 feet apart, both handcuffed to the heavy iron rail. The glamorous facade of conquering royalty had violently evaporated. They were cornered, trapped, and terrified. Blair was an absolute mess. Her pristine crimson couture gown was torn at the shoulder, and her carefully styled hair hung in damp, jagged strands across her tear-streaked face. She was screaming violently, straining against the short steel chain binding her wrist to the rail. "You told me the shell company was perfectly insulated," she shrieked, her voice cracking with raw, feral panic. "You told me Caldwell legally washed the vendor payouts. You set me up, Liam. You used me to sign those contracts so your hands would be clean. You are going to take the fall for this. I will testify against you." Liam lunged toward her as far as the short metal chain would allow, his face a mottled mask of purple rage. "Shut your mouth, Blair," he roared, spit flying from his lips. "You are the one who wired the money. You are the creative director who authorized the plywood staging and the cheap flowers. I was just a silent partner. You got greedy. You wanted the entire Omnitech budget, and now you are trying to drag me down for your blatant amateur embezzlement." They were tearing each other to pieces like rabid dogs fighting over a scrap of poisoned meat. There was no loyalty left, no grand romance, no visionary partnership. The absolute second the threat of federal prison became a reality, they instantly cannibalized each other. I stood quietly at the end of the hallway, watching the glorious implosion. Every stolen dollar, every gaslighting lie, every moment they had mocked my manufactured depression had culminated in this pathetic screaming match in a filthy police station. Liam suddenly stopped shouting. He had caught sight of me standing next to the duty desk. The ferocious rage drained from his face instantly, replaced by a look of sheer desperate terror. He scrambled to his feet, the handcuffs clanking loudly against the iron bar. "Paige," he gasped, his voice dropping an octave, adopting the broken, pleading tone of a drowning man. "Paige, please. You have to talk to me. Just give me 5 minutes. Please. I am begging you." Marcus glanced at me, offering a slight protective shake of his head, but I raised my hand. I wanted this. I needed to look him in the eye one last time while he had absolutely zero power. I gave the desk sergeant a nod. The officer unhooked Liam from the main rail, gripping his bicep and marching him into a small, windowless interrogation room adjacent to the booking area. I followed, stepping inside and letting the heavy steel door click shut behind me. The room was freezing cold and smelled of old vinyl. Liam practically collapsed into the metal chair across the small table. He was hyperventilating, his custom tuxedo jacket wrinkled and severely stained with sweat. He looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes, attempting to summon the old charm, the familiar manipulation that had worked on me for a decade. "Paige, you have to stop this," he begged, leaning forward as far as his restrained hands would allow. "You have to tell Vance's lawyers to drop the civil suits. If you drop the civil injunctions, I can liquidate my retirement accounts. I can hire a decent defense attorney. If you freeze my assets, I am going to a federal penitentiary." I stood on the opposite side of the table, my posture perfectly straight, my face an unreadable mask of ice. I let him speak. I let him dig his own grave deeper. "I was your husband, Paige," Liam pleaded, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion, tears welling in his eyes. "We built a life together. 10 years. We were a team before this madness started. I made a mistake. A massive, unforgivable mistake. I got lost in the money and I let Blair manipulate me. She poisoned my mind. But I am still the man you loved. Do not leave me with nothing. Please, Paige. I know you still care about me. Do not destroy my life over one mistake." I listened to the echo of his pathetic excuses bounce off the cinderblock walls. He was still trying to blame her. He was still trying to use our 10-year history as a psychological weapon to secure his own survival. I reached into my black leather designer tote bag. I did not pull out a tissue. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I pulled out a thick bound stack of legal documents and dropped them onto the center of the metal table with a heavy, definitive thud. Liam stared at the papers, total confusion washing over his tear-stained face. "What is this?" he whispered. I placed my hands flat on the table, leaning in close. The smell of his fear was palpable. "That, Liam, is the expedited separation agreement you aggressively bullied me into signing yesterday morning," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, calm whisper. "The document you forced on me while I was allegedly incapacitated by a mental breakdown. The document Caldwell drafted to ensure you walked away with the lion's share of our agency while isolating me from your new brilliant venture." Liam swallowed hard, his eyes darting from the document to my face. "I do not understand." I flipped the document open to the 5th page, dragging my perfectly manicured fingernail down to subsection C. "I suggest you read the cross-collateralization and liability clause," I said, stepping back and crossing my arms. "Because you were in such a frantic, arrogant rush to formally legitimize Apex Event Solutions and absorb my corporate debts, you legally bound yourself to a full individual indemnity waiver." I watched his eyes scan the dense legal jargon. I watched the exact second his brain finally comprehended the terminology. His breathing stopped completely. "You did not just steal Omnitech's money, Liam," I explained, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "By executing this specific agreement, you officially transferred all corporate liabilities from the LLC directly onto your own personal shoulders. You are individually responsible for the $2 million in vendor contracts Blair signed. You are individually responsible for the punitive damages Omnitech is filing tomorrow morning. You waived your corporate protection to hurt me, and in doing so you handed me the legal authority to completely liquidate every single asset you possess." Liam sat paralyzed in the metal chair, the breath hitching violently in his throat. He looked down at his own signature on the final page in stark black ink, the signature he had proudly flaunted just 24 hours ago. "You begged me not to leave you with nothing," I said, picking up my tote bag and turning toward the door. "But you signed away your future yesterday, Liam. You have no money, you have no agency, you have no defense attorney, you have absolutely nothing left to offer me." I reached out and grasped the cold steel handle of the door. Liam did not scream, he did not cry. He just let out a low, hollow sound of total structural collapse. I walked out of the interrogation room, leaving him chained to the metal table, completely buried beneath the crushing weight of his own profound arrogance. The heavy steel doors of the interrogation corridor closed behind me, shutting out the sterile fluorescent glare and the muted sounds of booking procedures. I walked down the concrete steps of the downtown Austin precinct, into the humid Texas night, the thick air feeling remarkably crisp and clean in my lungs. Marcus walked silently beside me, his briefcase secure, a subtle nod of professional respect passing between us, before he headed toward his own vehicle. I slid into the back of my waiting town car, resting my head against the cool leather seat. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the gala and the police station was finally beginning to level out, leaving behind a deep, profound sense of peace. Before the driver even pulled away from the curb, my phone began to vibrate violently against the center console. The screen lit up with a barrage of urgent notifications. The financial shockwave of the Omnitech Gala was already spreading rapidly through the Austin banking sector. But the most frantic incoming calls were not from corporate lawyers or panicked vendors. They were coming from a number I had deliberately ignored for the past month. The caller ID flashed Brenda's name in bright, aggressive letters. I let it ring, watching the screen go dark before it immediately lit up again. Brenda had not just cheered from the sidelines. In her blind, absolute certainty that her golden boy was a misunderstood business genius, she had actively financed his entire fraudulent ascension. I knew exactly what Caldwell had buried in the original seed funding contracts for Apex Event Solutions. Brenda had proudly acted as the primary guarantor. She had leveraged her entire retirement fund, liquidated her blue-chip stock portfolio, and taken out a massive second mortgage on her pristine suburban estate to bankroll the initial capital. She had funded the down payment on their flashy new downtown office space and fronted the cash for Blair's designer wardrobe. With Julian Vance publicly terminating the Omnitech contract and filing federal fraud charges, the banks were instantly executing their severe panic protocols. Apex Event Solutions was dead on arrival. Liam was personally liable for millions in venue and vendor debts. And because Brenda was the financial guarantor, the creditors were already coming for everything she owned. Her accounts were flagged for suspected money laundering and immediately frozen. The phone vibrated for a fourth consecutive time. I reached out and tapped the glass screen, accepting the call. The audio connection opened to a symphony of pure, unadulterated chaos. "Paige Brenda," screamed, her voice entirely stripped of its usual haughty, aristocratic drawl. She was hyperventilating, gasping for air between jagged, violent sobs. "Paige, please tell me you are there. Please tell me you can fix this." In the background, I could clearly hear Sydney wailing. The sharp, piercing sound of her panic echoed through the receiver. "My cards are declining," Sydney was shrieking in the distance. "The bank says the accounts are locked. Mom, they froze my trust fund. They locked me out of the portal. We cannot even pay the valet to get the car." "Shut up, Sydney!" Brenda snapped, her voice cracking with hysteria before she turned her frantic attention back to the phone. "Paige, listen to me. You have to call Julian Vance. You have to tell your lawyers to stop the asset seizures. The bank just called my cell phone. They are putting a lien on the estate right now. They are talking about federal asset forfeiture. Paige, they are taking my home." I sat perfectly still, watching the streetlights blur past the tinted windows of the town car. The contrast between her current terror and the smug, radiant arrogance she had displayed just an hour ago in the VIP lounge was staggering. She had spent 10 years treating me like an expendable employee who was never quite good enough for her son. Now she was weeping into the receiver, completely dependent on the woman she had tried to destroy. "We are family," Brenda sobbed, choking on her own tears when I did not immediately respond. "You are still legally married to Liam. You have the money from your agency. You have Omnitech's backing. You can post the bail, you can satisfy the creditors. You have to bail us out. Liam is in a holding cell, Paige. He is your husband. You have to save us. I will lose everything." I let her finish. I let the desperate begging ring in my ears until she ran completely out of breath. The silence stretched tight and thin over the cellular connection, broken only by Sydney's continued frantic weeping in the background. I thought Liam needed a woman with real ambition to help him reach his true potential. I said, my voice soft, calm, and perfectly modulated. Perfectly. Brenda stopped crying. The line went dead silent. A cold, terrifying realization was slowly creeping into her mind as she recognized her own exact words. The very phrases she had spoken to Blair while sipping vintage champagne in the front row of the Apex Pavilion. You sat in that arena tonight and you laughed about my manufactured depression? I continued, refusing to raise my voice. You bragged about how easily Liam had removed me from the picture. You celebrated a multi-million-dollar corporate fraud because you believed it elevated your social status. You were completely willing to watch me lose my company, my professional reputation, and my sanity, just so you could play the role of the wealthy tech matriarch. Page, please, Brenda, whispered a hollow, trembling sound of absolute defeat. I did not mean it. We were just caught up in the moment. You do not understand what is happening. They are going to take everything. I will have nothing left. I will be on the street. You placed your entire financial future in the hands of a narcissist and a thief. I replied, my tone devoid of a single ounce of empathy. You gambled your estate on their arrogance. I did not freeze your accounts, Brenda. I did not sign the guarantor paperwork on a fraudulent shell company. I just survived the execution you all planned for me. There was nothing left but the sound of her ragged breathing. Wait until the Austin elite see the photos from tonight, I added, echoing Sydney's cruel joke from the gala. I am sure you will look absolutely spectacular. I pressed the red button on the screen, severing the connection. I calmly blocked Brenda's number, then proceeded to block Sydney's. I tossed the phone onto the empty leather seat beside me. The silence returned to the back of the town car, deep and incredibly satisfying. The empire they had tried to steal was safe, and the toxic leeches that had drained me for 10 years were finally completely eradicated from my life. I looked out the window at the glittering Austin skyline, ready to go back to work. The glittering Austin skyline faded into the rearview mirror as my driver navigated the quiet streets. But the shockwaves of the night were already crashing into the distant suburbs. 10 miles away, in a sprawling manicured estate, another structural collapse was taking place. Jamal had spent the entire evening watching his wife's frantic social media broadcast from the quiet sanctuary of his home office. He was a pragmatic man, a successful architect who had silently observed the toxic, entitled rot festering inside the family he had married into. Tonight, watching the sheer scale of their public execution, he finally reached his absolute limit. He walked into their master bedroom and pulled a heavy canvas duffel bag from the top shelf of the custom closet. He packed with methodical precision, folding his clothes and gathering his essential financial documents. He was snapping the brass locks shut when the front door downstairs burst open. Sydney rushed into the house, shrieking his name. She scrambled up the hardwood stairs, her designer heels clicking frantically against the wood. Her expensive makeup was entirely ruined, running in dark black rivers down her flushed cheeks, and her breath came in ragged, terrified gasps. "Jamal," she screamed, bracing herself against the bedroom doorframe. "You have to wire money into my checking account right now. The bank froze my trust fund. They locked the estate accounts. Mom is completely hysterical, and Liam's lawyers are not answering the phone. I need a transfer immediately." Jamal did not flinch. He picked up his duffel bag and slung the heavy leather strap over his shoulder. He walked over to the mahogany dresser, picked up a thick manila envelope, and held it out to her. Sydney stared at the envelope, her eyes darting frantically. "What is that?" "I just told you I need cash, Jamal." "I am not your personal ATM, Sydney," Jamal said, his voice remarkably calm and completely devoid of affection. "And I am absolutely not attaching my personal finances or my firm to a federal fraud investigation." I called my legal team the second Liam was marched out of the pavilion in handcuffs. He pressed the envelope into her trembling hands. "Those are divorce papers. I filed for an expedited dissolution of marriage and a total absolute separation of assets." Sydney stared at him, her mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. "You cannot leave me!" she shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical, deafening wail. "My family is under attack. We need you." Your family is a sinking ship, Jamal replied, stepping past her into the brightly lit hallway. And you drilled the holes yourselves. I am not going down with you. He walked down the stairs, leaving her screaming his name. The sound echoed off the high vaulted ceilings as the heavy oak front door clicked shut, sealing her inside the massive empty house with nothing but her worthless frozen bank cards and a shattered marriage. 3 months later, the humid Texas summer had settled heavily over the city. As I walked up the wide concrete steps of the Travis County Courthouse, the day of the final divorce decree had arrived. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer, my posture rigid and my mind entirely clear. I bypassed the crowded security lines, escorted directly to the third floor by my legal team. The courtroom was a sterile, imposing space, paneled in dark oak and bathed in harsh fluorescent light. I took my seat at the petitioner's table, laying my hands flat on the polished wood. A moment later, the heavy doors at the back of the room swung open and Liam walked in. The physical transformation was staggering. The arrogant, meticulously groomed executive who had once worn $3,000 bespoke Italian suits was completely gone. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting gray jacket that sagged horribly at the shoulders. His face was gaunt, his skin carrying a sickly gray pallor, and his hands trembled visibly as he pulled out the chair at the respondent's table. He did not have a high-priced corporate defense attorney sitting beside him. He was represented by an exhausted, overworked public defender. The judge, a stern, silver-haired woman with zero tolerance for nonsense, took the bench and opened the final hearing. The proceedings were incredibly brief. Because Liam had arrogantly rushed to sign the airtight separation agreement before the gala, he had legally forfeited any right to contest the division of assets. Mr. Vance, the judge stated, peering over her reading glasses, looking directly at Liam. You voluntarily executed a binding agreement, absorbing all corporate deficits incurred under Apex Event Solutions. You explicitly waived your right to alimony, spousal support, and any claim to the petitioner's thriving agency. Do you understand that this decree finalizes your total assumption of those liabilities? Liam stared blankly at the polished wood of his desk. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. Yes, Your Honor, he whispered. The judge struck her heavy wooden gavel against the sounding block. The sharp crack echoed through the silent courtroom, sealing his fate. The marriage is dissolved. I stood up, buttoned my blazer, and walked out of the courtroom into the bright, sunlit corridor. I was barely 10 steps toward the elevators when I heard the scuff of cheap rubber shoes behind me. Paige! Wait! Liam called out, his voice a raspy, desperate croak. I stopped and turned slowly. He looked absolutely hollowed out, a pathetic shell of the man who had tried to steal my empire. They took the cars, he said, his hands shaking as he gripped the edge of a nearby wooden bench. The creditors seized the house yesterday. I am sleeping on a cot in a cheap motel off the interstate. I have over $2 million in vendor debt, and the federal prosecutor is pushing for a 5-year prison sentence for the Omnitech embezzlement. My mother will not even speak to me because she is facing foreclosure. I have nothing left, Paige. I am completely homeless. I am ruined. He looked up at me, his eyes begging for a single drop of pity. A tiny fraction of the grace he had so violently denied me when he thought he had won. I looked at his desperate, trembling hands and his sunken, hollow cheeks. I felt absolutely no sympathy. I told you the liability clause was airtight, Liam. I said, my voice crisp and completely devoid of emotion. You made your choices. Now you get to live in the wreckage. I turned my back on him without another word. The elevator doors slid open with a soft metallic chime. I stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. Through the narrowing gap of the closing doors, I watched Liam slump heavily onto the wooden bench, burying his face in his hands. The doors clicked shut, erasing him from my view permanently. I walked out of the courthouse and stepped into the blinding Austin sunlight, completely free and ready to govern the massive, lucrative empire I had built entirely on my own. 6 months had passed since I walked out of that courthouse and stepped into the blinding light of my new reality. The brutal, humid Texas summer had finally surrendered to a crisp, brisk winter. I stood at the head of a massive white marble conference table on the top floor of the Frostbank Tower. The panoramic floor-to-ceiling windows behind me offered a sprawling, breathtaking view of the Austin skyline, but my focus was entirely inside the room. This was the new premier headquarters of Vanguard Global Event Architecture. I had completely rebranded the agency aggressively, shedding the final lingering ghosts of the past and expanding my operational footprint far beyond local corporate tech galas. We had swallowed a massive, lucrative chunk of the international market, and the energy in the building hummed with the kinetic, relentless drive of 60 top-tier creatives and logistics managers. Today was the final round of a $90 million pitch for Maison Dupont, a legendary Swiss luxury conglomerate preparing to launch a highly anticipated sustainable watch line across North America. The 5 European executives sitting across the table from me were notoriously demanding. They possessed a reputation for shredding marketing agencies to pieces and walking out of pitches before the coffee even got cold. They wanted a flawless, immersive blend of high-end luxury aesthetics and zero-carbon execution. I navigated the digital creative deck with absolute lethal precision. I outlined the intricate botanical pavilions we would construct from reclaimed materials in New York, Miami, and Los Angeles. I detailed the interactive holographic displays and the sustainable supply chain pathways, mapping out an experiential marketing campaign that completely redefined modern luxury. I watched the stern, skeptical faces of the Swiss executives slowly soften into genuine intrigue. The lead director, a silver-haired man named Henrik, leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished marble. He was clearly impressed by the creative vision, but artistry was only half the battle in international corporate contracts. They needed airtight financial logistics to back up the aesthetics. They needed to know their $90 million investment was insulated, protected, and maximized to its absolute fullest potential. I stepped back from the digital display monitor and turned to the man sitting in the heavy leather executive chair to my right. Jamal smoothed the lapels of his custom-tailored midnight blue suit and stood up. He did not look anything like the exhausted, suffocated man who had been trapped under Sydney's endless materialistic demands 6 months ago. He looked sharp, composed, and completely in his element. I had hired him as Vanguard Global's chief financial officer exactly 3 days after he handed Sydney her divorce papers. It was without question the smartest corporate decision I had ever made in my entire career. I offered him a generous equity stake and a massive executive salary because I knew exactly what he was worth. Jamal approached the screen and seamlessly took control of the room. He tapped the tablet in his hand, shifting the presentation from my creative renders to his complex financial models. He broke down the international tax structures, the cross-border vendor allocations, and the real-time budget tracking algorithms he had personally designed for this specific campaign. He spoke with a quiet, commanding authority that instantly commanded absolute respect. He demonstrated exactly how Vanguard Global would manage their capital while maximizing operational efficiency across 3 different North American tax jurisdictions. There was no smoke, no mirrors, and absolutely no fabricated shell companies. It was just pure, brilliant financial architecture executed by a master of his craft. I caught his eye across the wide marble table. A brief, subtle nod passed between us. It was a silent acknowledgement of the ironclad loyalty and deep mutual respect that formed the bedrock of our partnership. We operated as a singular telepathic unit. I built the sky-high visions, and Jamal engineered the reinforced steel foundations that kept them standing. We had both been dragged through the mud by a family of narcissistic parasites. We had both lost years of our lives trying to satisfy their insatiable, bottomless greed. But standing there in the pristine glass corridor of our own making, we were entirely untouchable. Henrik looked at the financial projections on the screen and then looked at Jamal. The Swiss director closed his heavy leather portfolio with a definitive snap. A rare, genuine smile broke across his face. He stood up and extended his hand across the marble table. "You have a spectacular creative mind," Paige Henrik said, gripping my hand firmly before turning to Jamal. And your chief financial officer operates with a level of precision I rarely see outside of Zurich. Maison Dupont is officially awarding Vanguard Global the contract. We look forward to a very profitable partnership. The room erupted into polite professional applause. My team immediately moved in to handle the preliminary onboarding paperwork, while Jamal and I personally walked the European executives to the private elevator bank. We exchanged final pleasantries and watched the brass doors slide shut, sealing our massive victory. Jamal let out a slow breath, running a hand over his neatly trimmed beard. We walked back down the plush-carpeted hallway toward my corner office. The agency was alive with the sound of ringing phones, clicking keyboards, and the low hum of genuine productive success. I poured 2 glasses of aged bourbon from the crystal decanter on my credenza and handed one to Jamal. He accepted the heavy glass, leaning back against the edge of my desk. He looked out the window at the sprawling city below us, taking a sip of the amber liquid. $90 million, he said, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his face. We just secured a $90 million international launch. I leaned against the glass partition, taking a sip of my own drink. We did it without cutting a single corner, I replied, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. We did it with pure talent and clean books. Jamal raised his glass in a silent toast. We had survived the venomous storm of the Vance family and emerged completely victorious. There were no more screaming matches over drained trust funds. There were no more desperate pleas to cover up embezzlement and fraud. Jamal was thriving in a position that respected his immense intellect, and I was sitting at the absolute pinnacle of the industry. We had walked away from the wreckage they created and built a magnificent fortress entirely our own. I looked at my brilliant, highly paid CFO and knew that Vanguard Global was just getting started. Jamal finished his bourbon, the ice clinking softly against the crystal. He set the glass down on my desk, gave me one final nod of solidarity, and walked out of the office, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind him. I was left entirely alone in the sweeping silence of my new domain. The adrenaline of the $90 million victory settled into a steady, thrumming rhythm in my veins. I walked slowly around the perimeter of the room, letting my fingertips trace the cool surface of the glass windows that overlooked the sprawling city. Somewhere out there in the tangled grid of the Austin suburbs, Liam was clocking into his evening shift. Through the grapevine of corporate lawyers and court filings, I knew exactly where my ex-husband had landed. He was working at a massive discount electronics retailer out on the edge of the interstate highway. The man who had once worn bespoke Italian suits and sipped vintage scotch in VIP lounges was now forced to wear a stiff, bright blue polyester polo shirt with a plastic name tag pinned to his chest. He spent his days answering to a manager 10 years his junior and his nights arranging inventory on metal shelving units under harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights. The humiliation was absolute and inescapable. The federal judge had shown no mercy during his sentencing for the Omnitech embezzlement. Liam had avoided a lengthy prison term only by agreeing to a crippling restitution plan. Every single week, the federal courts automatically garnished 70% of his minimum wage paycheck to slowly repay the millions he owed in fraudulent vendor contracts and punitive damages. He lived in a rented room in a dilapidated boarding house, entirely stripped of his pride, his wealth, and his manufactured charm. He was completely trapped in a suffocating cycle of poverty, a hell of his own arrogant making. Blair had fared no better in the fallout of the Apex Event Solutions implosion. Her exile from the industry was swift, brutal, and utterly absolute. The moment the police marched her out of the gala in handcuffs, her professional reputation instantly evaporated. In the corporate event and luxury PR sectors, your name is your currency. Blair's name had become radioactive poison. No agency in Texas would take her calls. No boutique firm in the country would accept her resume. Her face and her federal fraud charges were plastered across every industry blog and business journal on the internet. She had desperately tried to rebrand herself in a smaller market, launching a pathetic social media consultancy under an assumed name, but the digital footprint of her crimes followed her everywhere. She was permanently blacklisted, exiled to the absolute fringes of the business world, forced to watch from the outside as Vanguard Global dominated the industry she had so greedily tried to conquer. She had thought she was a visionary mastermind, but she was ultimately nothing more than a footnote in my success story. The destruction of the Vance family legacy was finalized in a cramped two-bedroom apartment situated directly adjacent to a noisy commercial freight rail line. Brenda and Sydney had been violently forcefully ejected from their pristine suburban estate when the banks executed the total foreclosure. The shock of losing their inherited wealth had aged Brenda a decade in a matter of weeks. The woman who had once spent her afternoons directing landscapers and hosting country club luncheons now spent her days staring blankly at the cheap, peeling linoleum floor of a miserable rental unit. Her stock portfolios were liquidated, her designer furniture was auctioned off by federal creditors, and her socialite friends had abandoned her the exact second the scandal broke. Sydney had crashed into reality with equal devastation. Without Jamal to bankroll her extravagant lifestyle, and with her trust fund entirely drained, to cover her mother's legal liabilities, she was forced to do something she had never done in her entire life. She had to find a job. The former heiress was now working as a receptionist at a mid-tier dental clinic, answering phones and filing insurance claims to help cover their monthly rent. The luxurious, entitled world they had ruthlessly protected had completely vanished, leaving them trapped together in a tiny, claustrophobic space, bitterly resenting each other and suffocating under the weight of their own monumental hubris. I turned away from the window and walked over to my desk. I pulled open the bottom drawer and reached all the way to the back, retrieving a small velvet box. Inside lay the diamond wedding necklace Liam had given me a decade ago. It was a beautiful piece of jewelry, but it felt cold and heavy in my hand, like a chain I had finally managed to unlock. I closed my hand around the diamonds and walked across the office, pushing open the glass door that led out onto my private top-floor balcony. The night air was cool and brisk, sweeping across the terrace and catching the edges of my blazer. The city of Austin stretched out below me, an endless glittering grid of light and opportunity. I walked to the edge of the balcony, looking down at the streets. I did not feel any lingering sorrow. I did not feel any regret. I stepped over to the sleek metal trash receptacle positioned near the lounge seating. I held my hand over the dark opening and slowly uncurled my fingers. The diamond necklace dropped, slipping from my skin and hitting the bottom of the empty bin with a hollow, insignificant clatter. It was gone. I gripped the glass railing of the balcony, looking out at the empire I had built. For years, Liam and his family had mistaken my quiet dedication for compliance. They had looked at my silence and assumed it was weakness. They thought a woman who did not scream, who did not demand the spotlight, was a woman who could be easily broken and discarded. They were catastrophically wrong. There is a deadly, terrifying strength in a woman's silence. It is not the sound of surrender. It is the sound of a predator analyzing the terrain. It is the sound of a mind calculating every angle, memorizing every weakness, and building an inescapable trap. While they were busy shouting their arrogance to the world, I was quietly, silently building the guillotine. They handed me the rope, and I let them tie the knot themselves. I had survived their poison, outmaneuvered their greed, and claimed my rightful throne. I took a deep breath of the crisp night air, smiling into the dark. The game was officially over, and I had won. The most profound lesson here is that true power resides not in loud retaliation, but in silent, calculating resilience. When faced with deep betrayal, Paige did not engage in endless screaming matches. Instead, she channeled her anger into building an untouchable empire alongside Jamal. They teach us that the ultimate revenge is not destroying your enemies. It is stepping out of their toxic shadow to construct a magnificent life on your own terms. Silence is never surrender. It is the quiet execution of absolute success. Please share your personal experiences of choosing silent growth over conflict in the comments below.